Dang. Well, folks, let's see if people get back to join me here. See what's happening. Very annoying. Had a dozen people there, and we got disconnected. So am I back? Nope, that's the other one. Hmm. Doesn't look like I'm back online yet. Mm-mm-mm-mm. This says I'm on, but there we go. Okay, let's see if that's got me going now. Right. What the heck is going on here? It still doesn't look right. Am I back? Oh, I'm back. Okay. Well, it's not playing on my end, so I'm back. All right. Well, sorry about that. Gosh bless. Wow. I'm back. Thanks, Mark and Teeny Ice. Okay, folks. Only one thing I didn't do this time that I've been doing, and that was reset my router. I didn't think I had to do that. I rebooted my laptop, reset my video card. I'm starting to think it's my router that's the problem. So in future, what I'll do is I'll reboot my router every time I go ahead and start this. Teeny, what I was talking about was I was talking about Governor Wolf here in Pennsylvania, but I was about to shift stream from Pennsylvania and the issues taking place here to Botswana crafts. But okay, so Ice sent me an email with the link to Gareth. Thank you very much for that, Ice. Yeah, so Governor Wolf is under a lot of pressure here in Pennsylvania from the right and the left and the center about the measures. The government has, in the view of many Pennsylvanians, there's 12.8 million Pennsylvanians, in the view of many, has not been transparent, and the Department of Health has not been transparent enough to explain why it is that two-thirds of the state must remain under lockdown when only about a third of that area actually has significant numbers of COVID-19 cases. As I said, I think it might have something to do with the transportation routes if you look at a map of Pennsylvania. I'm not sure. All right, so let me shift because a few people have made it back. My sincere apologies. Very frustrating how this happens, folks. But back to stray voltage. So I don't know if anyone's ever been to Botswana, but let me talk to you about Botswana a little bit here. So not too far from Airport Junction, which is the main intersection just before you head over to the main airport there, Seretse Khama Airport, International Airport in Gaborone, you will find not too far from that junction, about a half a kilometer on the left-hand side as you head around away from the airport, you will find a place called Botswana Craft Marketing. And Botswana Craft Marketing is the single stop that every tourist must go to when they go to Botswana. Certainly, anybody that flies in the country ought to go there to pick up knickknacks and souvenirs of Botswana. Now, Botswana is known for a number of things, not the least of which is beef, but you're not going to be carrying back a side of beef in your luggage. Let's hope not. Certainly not if you go to New Zealand, which has agricultural standards, and they will inspect your side of beef and reject it. Or even biltong. Botswana has some pretty good biltong as well for South Africans, if you didn't know that. But what they do have is Botswana is well known for the craftsmanship of its handmade baskets. And so let me show you these. So this is a handmade, handcrafted basket from Botswana Crafts. Each of these is sold there, and they're done by a craftsperson or craftsman, craftswoman who makes these in the rural, remote areas, particularly in the northwest part of the country around the Okavango Delta in the Maun region. And what happens is that they produce these, and they're functional as well. You can actually put things in here, although I don't know what I would put in here. So here you go. Diamonds, yes, Teeny, they're also known for diamonds. That's right. But most of us can't afford the diamonds coming from Botswana. So, anyway, so this is now these baskets that I'm talking about are incredibly well crafted, and the artwork is phenomenal. They're durable. The baskets I'm showing are all, or at least a decade old in my possession since I purchased them. Some even older than that, and these things can be inexpensive to quite expensive. They have these at Botswana Crafts. You can purchase baskets that cost 6 or 7 thousand US dollars. Yeah, 6 or 7 thousand US dollars. So that is one example, and they tend to be these earth colors of brown and tan and the dark chocolate color. So they're quite beautiful. Now, normally for the more expensive baskets, there'll be a biography with the artist who makes the basket, and you can get that. So there you go. So this is one example of a Botswana craft basket. Here's a lighter example. Now, this was a rather inexpensive one. You can see the styling is not nearly as detailed as the other that I just showed you. So you got this little thing to pull up on the top here. So Botswana craft. Let me put that on the screen. I have actually a image of what their website looks like. You can find them. They do ship internationally, but it may be a bit pricey. But anybody that's in South Africa that wants to travel to Botswana, make sure you stop at Botswana Craft Marketing before you leave town. So this one is not quite the detail, and so I actually have the price of what I paid on this one. Now this was a while ago when the pula was much stronger. It was about 6 to 7 to 1. Now it's about 12 to 1, so it's about half as valuable. But this one cost me 240 Botswana pula, which at the time was about $30. Today, that's going to be significantly less than that. So that's a rather inexpensive one. That's one example. And there are numerous ones here. So let me see how I can do this without losing the screen. Let's see. Christoph is here. Welcome. And you're laughing about something I must have said. Ice says, sadly, I think it was 6 when I was in Botswana, the one only time, but I do remember some of the wildlife, the leopards, the massive baobab. Yeah, you need to get back, Ice. It's a fantastic place. So here you go. This is another lovely one from Botswana. Look at the pattern, the intricate work here. And each of these is labeled. They have a label on it. And really amazing artwork. Now, you can get baskets all over Africa, and you get them. The Zulu make them. The Swazi make baskets as well as necklaces and beads. Uganda, you can get them. But I am biased and arguing that I think that the absolute best baskets made in all of Africa come from Botswana. Now, I'm probably going to get some flame hate mail from South Africa or maybe even Ethiopia, but I'm telling you, these are amazing. This one is a very intricate one, and this was a bit more expensive. Let's see. This one cost me 1,000 pula. Yeah, look at that, 1,000 pula. Fantastic basket, intricate, beautiful patterns, wonderful stuff. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I own no stock or interest in Botswana Craft. I'm just sharing. Every visitor that came when I worked at the American Embassy, we made sure we got them a trip to go by there. People always want to buy a souvenir of a place they've been, so we always take them to Botswana Craft. It was one of the best choices to find things. They also have things beyond baskets, but they also do, if you want to buy Bushman, things like little spears and arrow satchels and things like that, you can find all those things there as well. So here's another one. This one's 420 pula. Yeah, look at that. Absolutely beautiful. The colors are fantastic. They're natural colors. None of these wild things. There's nothing wrong with wild colors, but fantastic. Now, let me shift and give you a comparison. Now, this one's tightly done, very stiff material, well done. This is not from Botswana. This is from Uganda. This is a traditional Uganda basket. You can see the color differences, similar patterns though, but this one's from Uganda. And there are some quite good ones made in Uganda, but the Uganda basket market is not as well known. The Botswana is. So a few more from Botswana. So little lighter earth tones here. Not really a hat, I guess. Where is a hat? So anyway, what do you guys think about these? Christoph doesn't like Botswana. Botswana seems like a nice country as an alternative for some African. Oh, yeah, actually, and if you speak Afrikaans, there's a fair number of people in Botswana who do speak Afrikaans. White Botswana who speak Afrikaans, and also there is a small colored population in Botswana, largely on the southern border of the country, but also around Gaborone as well, as a consequence of, of course, the Griquas and the Orlums and such who moved through the areas in South Africa, just below that in Kimberley and that region in the Northern Cape, of course, went across the border as well. So they weren't confined just inside what became South Africa. This was not nearly the same quality, so it's less expensive. This one was not very expensive at all, but some of these artists or these people who make these baskets are truly tremendous. This one's a bit darker, more of a chocolate color, mocha there. Christoph has a love-hate relationship with Gareth Cliff. Yeah, I noticed you said that on Ronaldo Hose, and I was curious about that. So do tell if you don't mind. Let's see. I'll make sure I'm not missing all the comments here. Cliff rather threateningly ended with a biblical reference when Moses. Yeah, Christoph, I think that probably was the one piece that he added in his comments that I would have left off. That wasn't necessary. Oh, by the way, do you like my lockdown do? Not bothering to even brush my hair today. I just shook all the liquid out after I showered. We all know that story went to Pharaoh. Yeah, okay. Moses, you guys are stuck on Moses. You need to get a Land Cruiser before we make the journey. Yeah, well, you can fly there. Oh, you can't fly. There's no flights. We have lockdown going on. Botswana seems like a nice country as an alternative for some South Africans. It is. Oh, you do like Crystal. Fantastic. Yeah, here you go. So this is great. Yeah, Botswana doesn't have all the hangups that you still have in South Africa, and you probably have for decades, particularly when it comes to race. Race is not a major or significant issue for most people in Botswana. They don't really pay much attention to it. It's a non-starter. There's a lot of reasons for that. It never had apartheid. It was never really ruled by South Africa. It was just a protectorate. And so the administration was in Mafeking, so they didn't really pay much attention to it when it's Bechuanaland. The traditional chief system had authority all the way up until independence and still has some degree of authority, although legal authority trumps that. And then, of course, the first president famously was married to an English woman, a white English woman. And so his children are mixed race, and eventually one of them, Ian Khama, became president of Botswana in his own right. So there's not the hangups about race that you see in South Africa, although no place is perfect, and there's always issues with people. So here's another one, not as attractive, but interesting, different pattern. Now, this one here is not from Botswana. I forget where I got this one at. Don't even remember. I think this might have been from is it Uganda or was it Ethiopia? It might be Ethiopia. I'm not sure. But this is more of a functional one. You can actually use for things. I don't really treat most of these baskets as something that I actually put things in. I just keep them kind of as artwork because they really are quality. Now this one is from Uganda, and I got this because I like the color. It's different. Purple is my favorite color, and so I also liked how it kind of spins around here, kind of like going down a well sort of thing. It's really interesting, and it's both sides, different colors. You get the blue and the purple. So yeah, this was for Uganda, so I bought that. But I got on this basket kick when I was in when I was in Botswana, which got me started, and I started buying them all over Africa, and I still find the Botswana ones the best. Now this is another one from Uganda, so you can see that Uganda is trying to rival Botswana for nice quality. Again, the same with the seashell sort of look there, and yeah, this one's also very stiff and durable. Yeah, it's just, so those are baskets from Botswana Craft. Should be interesting if you ever get a chance to get there. Check out their website. They do ship abroad, but it's not the same as going there and buying it. The experience now, the one thing I will say is that I haven't been there for. I think the last time I was there was 2 or 3 years ago. But usually when I go there, unless if they don't know you, they're kind of standoffish. The people that work there, it's not like they come up to offer to help assist you with service. You can get their attention, and they'll be quite helpful. But it's not like you're going to be pressured. Well, you should buy this. This is one of our finest baskets. You should buy these little stuffed animals. They are made right now. There's none of that pressure. So actually, if you've got a question, you've got to engage the staff usually. Now, I don't know if that's changed, but that certainly was the case for at least a decade. Nonetheless, they're quite helpful. So take a look at that. So Ice says he likes the hair. Letting your beard and hair grow. Yeah, so this was being grown for tomorrow's debate. Tomorrow I appear on the Center for Strategic and International Studies debate. It'll be broadcast live online, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So there'll be 1600 or 4 p.m. in South Africa tomorrow. It's an hour debate. It might go a little bit longer, but I am one of the debate participants. There are four of us, two con and two pro. The topic is human rights and counterterrorism operations, counterterrorism training, that sort of thing. So that's a topic for the Center for Strategic International Studies, CSIS. It's a very well-known think tank around the world, and I was asked to participate in it based on my experience in training security forces and militaries around the world, and also my counterterrorism and intelligence experience. So I'll be participating on it. It's a debate. I get a 7-minute stretch where I get to offer counterpoints, and each of us have 7 minutes, and then we get questions back and forth. And then also, I think you'll be able to vote online if you participate in it. Just go and register at the CSIS website, CSIS, Charlie, Sierra, India, Sierra. Look it up on Google if you're interested. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock or 4 p.m. in South Africa time. Hopefully, folks can join us. It should be interesting. Tonight, I'll also be appearing on a radio broadcast, a live stream, which is actually on Facebook for truckers here in the United States in the transportation industry. We'll be talking about the impacts of COVID-19 and decisions by the government when it relates to transportation here in the United States. Yeah, so there you go. Not just the better dressed chimpanzee. Actually, can talk about a few different topics. So I'll be appearing on that one. That was actually a consequence of my mother, who's involved with the trucking industry, getting me on the broadcast, mentioning my name to them. They did a little research on me and said, hey, we'd like to get this guy on the program. So I'm going to try to see how that goes this evening. That's 6 p.m. here in the U.S. tonight on the radio, and so midnight in South Africa. That should be interesting. I hope that it is interesting. If anybody's curious, I'll need to remember to post the link to it at the end. It's on Facebook. I didn't look up the link. So there you go, Botswana Craft, fantastic stuff. Great things you can buy from there. Lots of little souvenirs if you ever get to Gaborone. And I don't think they have any other locations, but Habaroni definitely is a location that they have. It's a fantastic business and a great place to go and get souvenirs to remember some place you've been, like Botswana. All right, so also, oh, this is very exciting. Let me put this up here. Let me see. I'm going to get this up here. Where's it at? Here she is. Okay, so I've mentioned previously on my stream this Afrikaans singer, Giselle, who is from Namibia. And she had a song that she produced a video about 3 years ago called Sudwest, singing about Southwest Africa or Namibia. And in that video, the cinematography is fantastic. She has a wonderful voice, very interesting. Excuse me, very interesting. And so I found her very interesting. I went to the website to look her up because I never heard of her. And I found the website, and there's a link there, and I contacted her. I thought, but it was her manager who runs the site, and I've been in touch with them ever since. So big news, folks. We're working this now, but I will definitely be rebooting my router and my laptop to make sure we don't run into these break in action streams this Friday. May, what is that? So today's the 3rd, 4 more days, the 7th, I think it is. 7th, this Friday, the first week of Friday in May, Giselle will be debuting her new album, which is finally coming out. She was going to do a tour, but of course, with COVID-19, that's not possible. So Giselle will be debuting. Now, she's an Afrikaans singer, but she also sings in English, and she sings country music and kind of light pop, I guess you could call it. Anyway, so she will be debuting, and her manager and I are working together. Guess where she'll be debuting, among other places? Right here on my channel. So that's the plan. Friday evening, 7 p.m. Johannesburg time, so 1 in the afternoon in the US on the East Coast. Giselle will likely be streaming right here. You'll get to listen to her. Now, a lot of musicians around the world, but also in South Africa, have been performing concerts at home, if you want to call it a concert. Largely, it's just a musician standing there playing, or sitting there in their den, singing with a guitar, and that's it. But in this case, Giselle's manager has told me that they've really went to a lot of work to create a set to give us the feel of a very professional performance, since it's her debut of her album, which will also include Sudwest, that song from 3 years ago. So I'm really looking forward to this. It's big news. I'm very excited. I'm very humbled that her manager Johan would ask me to carry it on my stream, and I hope that some of you guys can tune in and just listen to it. If you know English, if you know Afrikaans, it should be interesting for you. Most people I've mentioned to have never heard of Giselle, so we'll see how this goes. But anyway, I'm looking very much forward to that this Friday, and that'll be my live stream. So once I hear back from him, we'll put some promo things up, we'll schedule it, and I'll keep talking about it as the week goes along. Anyway, so that should be fascinating. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Giselle, like I wasn't just a few weeks ago, here you get the chance to find yourself as the door opens as a new artist comes on the scene. And will she be big like Nadine or Juanita du Plessis or Franja du Plessis or a whole host of Liane May or a whole host of Afrikaans singers? We shall see. But she was supposed to be on tour here in the United States with a performance in Dallas and I think New York and a couple of other locations. But of course, the coronavirus preempted that, so she's not able to do that. But anyway, so I'm looking forward to that. Nobody's commenting. I don't know if anyone's still getting this because you're not commenting. Does the Giselle thing interest folks or not? Please let me know. So let me see. Christoph is still talking about Gareth. He says, I am sure he does not always mean to, but he also takes the opposite view to create conversation. Well, yeah, that's part of being a host. I think being provocative, sometimes he does that. But that's what I have to do in this debate. My true feelings will not be necessarily what I propose when I argue the point. My true feelings on the subject of counterterrorism and human rights will be exposed at the end when each of us gets to a few minutes to discuss how we really feel about the topics. Christoph says the one thing about Botswana is extremely limiting in its development is that it's landlocked. Well, yeah, but it's not the only landlocked country in the world, and landlocked countries can be successful. Switzerland's landlocked. It's fabulously successful. It has everything to do with population size, systems of governance, business climate, and potential, as well as an educated workforce, and these days infrastructure, IT especially, but also roads. So Botswana, it's limited from being landlocked, but hey, so is Switzerland. Completely landlocked and quite successful. Slovenia is also landlocked and very successful country. All right. Oh, so Ice, Ice, are you out there buying the NDZ smokes? Is that what you're up to? Oh my goodness. I love that Zoll thing that that, that Ronaldo made people aware of. I'm just loving that to death. I'm promoting it everywhere and telling everybody about it. In Kozazani Dalemi Zuma's own words being used in a meme. That's awesome. Really good stuff. Anyway, so that's Giselle this Friday. Hopefully, it'll work out. Looking to see her come on the show and see how that goes. All right. So, as I mentioned, since I mentioned Giselle, she's living in Pretoria now, but she's from Namibia. But since she's from Namibia, let me just talk about Namibia. So, on midnight Monday, as it goes from the 4th to the 5th of May, Namibia will be lifting some of its restrictions. Namibians who are abroad can return to the country. The borders will be open, but only for Namibian citizens. On arrival, they'll be quarantined, tested, and they'll be quarantined for 14 days. So they can come back in the country, but they're going to be in isolation for 2 weeks until it's clear that they do not have the Wuhan coronavirus. So anyone else that wants to go to Namibia, too bad. You can't go. The borders are still closed for the rest of us, only for Namibian citizens. So that should be a rather small number of folks. I imagine most of those will be people who are actually in South Africa that hadn't got a chance to go home. So that is taking place. All school workers, teachers, staff will be returning this week as well. They all have to return between the 5th and the 11th, and they must be back at work by the 11th. Now, don't get excited. That doesn't mean the schools are opening in Namibia. That's not until August 3rd when all pupils will return. There'll be no staggered return to school, at least as of the moment, in Namibia. All students will be returning simultaneously to school for the third semester term, excuse me, beginning on August 3rd in Namibia. So there you have it. Some of the sanctions being, or not sanctions, some of the restrictions of the lockdown being lifted in Namibia, which has only had a handful of cases. They're still under 20 last time I checked. I think it was 16 or 20 or 18 cases total with no fatalities. Remarkably low number. So there you have it. Whether the measures were effective or the fact that Namibia is a huge country with almost nobody in it, living far apart for the most part, that probably had a better impact because people tend to be separated in a country like that in remote areas, except for the urban centers. And there's really only Windhoek is the only main urban center. Luderitz is not really that big. Swakopmund is not that big. Yeah, the Zal tune is just awesome. I absolutely love it. I've been sharing it with everybody I know from Southern Africa, passing it around to them by message and sending them the link, and people are just laughing. It's really. They roll the paper and they shed the saliva. Anyway, I can't even do it. I can do it when the music's playing. I can do it. I've actually watched her present this information, and the way that Hurl clips all that together, it's perfect along with the beat. That's a great beat. You can just listen to that and sit back and drink a Bacardi and Coke and relax in the club while you listen to that. Maybe get out on the floor and dance a little bit. Awesome stuff. Really awesome stuff. Well, so that's Namibia. Things will be improving there with the lockdown here in the short term. Botswana has extended its lockdown for another week with the intent to start easing restrictions after that week is over and by the end of May for the restrictions to be completely lifted. Now, this is in stark contrast to what the president wanted. President Masisi had asked for a 6-month state of emergency, which terrified a lot of people in Botswana and with good reason. So it looks like the government is trying to lift this as quickly as possible. Botswana's GDP, Reuters has reported, will decline by 13% in 2020. This is because demand for diamonds has dried up. So you see that the diamond production from the Minister of Finance was projected to bring in 20 billion pula this year. Now they're expecting just 6.7 pula by the end of 2020. That's 2/3 of revenue dropping. Now, why that matters for Botswana is because the country is overly dependent on the mining sector, and the mining sector is still heavily dependent on diamonds. 2/3 of the government's revenue or foreign currency earnings of the countries come from mining, most of that from diamonds, and as much as 3/4 of the government's actual revenue comes from diamond mining. Now that's because they own a stake in Debswana and they get multiple cuts. They get taxes, they get royalties, plus they get to split the profits from Debswana, and it's not even an even split. De Beers gets less as a percentage than what the government of Botswana gets. So they really make a lot of money off of De Beers operations. And De Beers operations with Debswana are the more profitable diamond mines in Botswana, excuse me. The Jwaneng mine, which is located in the southeast corner of Botswana, is where most high quality gemstone diamonds on the planet come from, on the planet. And so that is controlled by De Beers and Debswana and the government of Botswana under Botswana. So the government of Botswana drives a lot of its revenue from diamonds in one way or another, and the diamond market collapsing is dangerous for the government. Its budget deficits now estimated to go from 2.4% this year to 5.9% as revenue declines, but they still expect to spend 59 billion pula for the year. It's quite a significant difference for them. But Botswana can survive this. They have good macroeconomic policies. In the 2008-2009 financial crisis, which saw diamond demand fall off a cliff in the same manner, the government took very prudent steps. They made 5,000 government workers redundant. They had unemployment benefits, but they sent them home and they weren't working to reduce the outlays from the government. And they suspended capital projects. In other words, for instance, the staff college was supposed to be built that year for the Army, but it was postponed because the government was not going to spend that money because they needed to deal with the shortfall in revenue. Smart moves, fiscal prudence by Botswana. We'll see if this president and his administration, Masisi, are as prudent as Ian Khama's administration was in 2008, 2009. Hopefully they are. Hopefully that won't be a problem. We shall see. But anyway, so the government of Botswana, a significant revenue shortfall. Now, I'm actually impressed by Reuters' research on this and their analysis because I'm so sick of hearing people saying GDP will decline by 3% or 5%. This is utter nonsense, folks. It's cock, it's crap. How can an economy only decline by 3 to 4% in any country around the world that's under lockdown, and you've seen a dramatic slowdown in consumer spending for 3 or 4 months now? That's a quarter of the year. So I'm not buying it. China, people talk about how China is going to do a great job. I think China is going to fall off a cliff from this, quite frankly. People aren't buying their goods. They're not getting the resource they need to make the goods because you can't ship things from other parts of the world that provide them with natural resources to make their products. And on top of that, a lot of the world is very angry at the Chinese at the moment. So they have a multitude of problems. People seem to think that they're going to come out of this smell like a rose. I disagree. The people that come out of this smell like a rose might be the leftists and their totalitarian desire to rule and control people as if we're serfs and peasants the world over. That may be who comes out of this smell like a rose. I hope not. But given the conduct of state, local government here in the United States, and even the national government to some degree, but also governments like the South African government and others around the planet who are denying liberties on thin claims of protecting the public health, really, really are making a lot of folks nervous. We shall see. Teeny doesn't like De Beers. Why is that, Teeny? Please share. Is there something you can share with us why you don't like De Beers? Ice says that, Christoph says Switzerland do not produce, do produce high-tech products, hence developed country. Yeah, well, but Christoph, Switzerland didn't always produce high-tech products. It's been around for a long time. The Swiss Confederation has been around for about 1,000 years, or 850 years, something like that. And they were successful for a long time. Their geography helps them, but Lesotho is also a mountainous country, but that doesn't help them. But the geography in the center of Europe, near the crossroads, the main passing routes, particularly from Southern Europe to Northern Europe, for goods and services, gave them an advantage geographically, but also well-educated workforce. And yes, they do produce high-tech products. Some fantastic defense munitions they produce, but also in the age of IT, they play a large role. And because of their geographic position, they took advantage of that for centuries, or a couple centuries, with banking laws and secrecy laws, which made them a haven for people trying to find a place to park money, which gave them a lot of resources to invest. And so all of that plays a role. Those aren't necessarily things that Botswana has, but Botswana can very easily, in my view, be a financial, IT, and pharmaceutical hub in Southern Africa, if only the government would focus its energies there. Now, there has been an effort for it to become a financial hub, and it has become increasingly an important financial center in Africa and also in Southern Africa. Not on the scale of Mauritius yet, but it is making progress there. But there's a lot of other things that they can do in Botswana that really haven't been done. And the government always has these 5-year development plans, a new development plan, national development plan every 5 years. And they've had these since independence in '66. And they keep talking about diversifying the economy. And here we are 50 plus years later, and the economy is still not diversified to the degree that it really needs to be. So Botswana has a ways to go when it comes to that, and to reduce and lessen its dependence on mining. The mines won't last forever. And even if they do last forever, the mining doesn't benefit all of society in the way that other parts of the economy could if you expand it. So anyway, that's a little bit about that. So I said some people are of the opinion. I didn't say that I'm opinion. Oh, okay. Sorry. Didn't mean to attribute something to you. Okay. Let's see what else. They offer some. Oh, ICE says they offer some very specific services that are not usually found in other countries. The country is a tax haven for the. Oh, Switzerland, yes. Christoph says many old European countries are centuries ahead of the rest of the world in the ability to generate money through advanced industries and major invested interest in other. Yeah, that's true. Absolutely true. ICE agrees many countries are going to see negative double digit. Yeah, exactly. Teeny says most of the money goes to fat cats in England, U.S. from De Beers. Hmm. Um, well, maybe from De Beers as a corporation, but certainly not from the diamonds that come out of Botswana. The majority, the lion's share of that money, despite what a lot of people say, actually goes to the government of Botswana, um, because they have an increasingly larger share of the revenue and the royalties that, and plus the taxation that comes out of the Debswana project. Now, Debswana is not the only diamond producer in Botswana. There are others. Lucara, which is a Canadian operation, is producing mines in previously disused pipes that they're finding some rather large diamonds, and they've gotten a lot of attention the last few years. In the interest of full disclosure, I am a shareholder in Lucara. I have shares in that in my retirement account, which I purchased a few years ago. So I wish them well. I hope they have good production and they make a lot of money. I'm looking forward to that. We shall see. Switzerland arguably never fights, but does fund conflict directly and indirectly. Oh, it's a question. No, the Swiss don't have a record of funding any conflicts. They do produce munitions, but they're for domestic consumption by and large. They do ship some things overseas, but they haven't really been involved in funding any conflicts. Yeah, no. Christoph, the number of small businesses with 10 or less employees that will not survive the situation is a big concern. Many of these businesses used to survive on a month-to-month basis. Yeah, no, Christoph, you're absolutely right. Whether it's in the formal or informal sector, small and medium enterprises are most at risk. You know, the big companies get all the attention. We can save the General Motors. We can save the Anglo Americans. We can save the, I don't know. We can't save Edcon apparently. Maybe that's probably a good thing. But yeah, the larger companies oftentimes have the resources. It's the small companies that don't. New businesses or businesses that just remain small. Take, for instance, a contractor that does plumbing services has 5 or 6 employees. Companies like that will find it difficult to survive. Now, that's maybe not the best example because under lockdown, I imagine that the plumber is an essential service and those people continue to do business. But there are other examples. Maybe someone who has a transport company has 3 or 4 combis that they own and they run them on the traffic. They have a half a dozen drivers who run those things. They're not going to survive. And the resources, the funds that are made available either from Johann Rupert or the Oppenheimers or the government itself aren't going to be enough, especially when the government's discriminating against minority-owned businesses. That's really a problem. So let's see. ICE says, I would expect the founders to put the funds up to start the company to make money. Otherwise, well, if you're ICE, if you're talking about De Beers, yeah, those founders are dead. Those guys founded the company over 100 years ago. But yeah, those who own the equity in the company are the ones that fund its operations. Stuff. I think ICE come in. Oh, okay, gotcha. Sorry, I'm a little behind the comments. I'm trying to keep it going here. So Christoph, oh, ICE says, Christoph, especially when you consider of all the business in South Africa, small business, such a huge percentage of the economy is going to suffer and disappear sadly. Yeah, no, absolutely. So no one's really talking about it, but probably one place we all should be looking at is Germany. Germany's Mittelstand, as they call it, that's the small businesses, are the life and blood. Two-thirds of all German businesses are small business. Those are ones with less than 50 employees. Two-thirds of all German business. German business and its products are renowned the world over. I mean, I've been in places in Africa where I've found lathes and industrial equipment that were manufactured by Germans 100 years ago, and they're still being used in Africa. They're that reliable. So German products have a great reputation, not just their automobiles, but certainly industrial products. And those are all manufactured by and large, not by Krupp or Krupp and other large companies like that, but by small firms that do this. And those are the ones most in jeopardy. I've not heard much reporting on what's happening with the Mittelstand in Germany, and I would be fascinated to find out what efforts the government in Berlin has been taking to mitigate this crisis for them. Because when the small business disappears, we all disappear in the end. The big corporations may get all the press and may have all the money to get all the attention, but it is the lifeblood of every economy is normally small and medium enterprises. Many neutral countries in times of conflict are neutral given the interest of both sides. Okay. Maybe the claims are more aimed at companies holding funds in Switzerland, using that maybe to fund dodgy stuff. Yeah, well, okay. The thing is about Switzerland and tax evasion and its secrecy laws is that the banking laws in Switzerland have been changed. And the Swiss government's willingness, Bern's willingness, that's the capital, Bern's willingness to cooperate with international authorities in other countries when it comes to money laundering, criminal enterprises, syndicates, and tax evasion has been remarkably open for the past 15 to 20 years, reversing the course that Switzerland had for centuries. As a consequence, a lot of people find it very difficult to hide their ill-gotten gains in Switzerland these days. Not impossible, but it's become increasingly harder. So a lot of those people who look to hide that money or use it for nefarious purposes, or who have gotten it through nefarious purposes, are looking at the Channel Islands like Jersey and Guernsey, or the Caribbean, where we have a number of sovereigns that allow for secrecy in banking. But you run a risk there. I mean, if I was going to hide my money, I would want to hide it in a Swiss bank because I'm comfortable that Swiss banks will survive most any economic crisis. Not necessarily convinced that a bank in the Cayman Islands is a safe place for me to hide my money. Not that I have any money to hide, I'm just saying. But you do take a risk if you put your money in the Cayman Islands. But also, countries like Austria, which was little known for a long time, were a place where people offshored their funds. The German government's notoriously high personal income tax rate forced a lot, well, enforced, but encouraged a lot of people to take their money that they saved in banks and move it elsewhere, like Switzerland or Austria, for a long time. Now, the Germans had a tax holiday and they tried to enforce the laws, and Austria's inclusion in the European community changed all of that. But for a long time, Austria was a place where Germans could simply drive across the border and deposit their Deutschmarks before the euro came along in Austrian banks, earn money, and not worry about paying taxes to the German government. And that wasn't one or two people, that was tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Germans who did that. Same with Switzerland. But that has become less possible for people to do today. So, Dahar, what's my take on China buying out those struggling small businesses in Europe? I've not seen reporting on that, but I certainly would expect, and this is something I've said in a number of discussions, chats, and things I've been writing, both on LinkedIn and articles I've been writing, is that those who have resources, what I mean by resources are cash on hand or resources that can be converted into cash rather quickly, are the ones that are going to profit immensely from this disaster. As companies' common stock prices collapse, and as companies find it difficult to make payroll or to pay suppliers, they're going to find that they're going to need a guardian angel or someone to come in and save the day. Those that are sitting on a vast store of resources, people like Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, like that, will be able to swoop in and buy things up for a song, buy them at huge discount. So, for instance, I mentioned, I don't know the current price, but a couple weeks ago, Nedbank in South Africa, which is a sound bank and is one of the large five banks in South Africa, it's selling for just a few rand a share. The dividend is almost the size of the share price at one point. Why? This is panic over COVID-19. The bank is not in any danger of going under. If you do look at the financials, it's reasonably sound. And so smart investors would swoop in and buy a bunch of shares, unless there's an underlying situation we're not aware of. But if that's the case, then the price shouldn't be collapsing because only insiders would know that. Anyway, so yeah, those with resources will be able to profit from this disaster and potentially make an awful lot of money. We'll see what happens. Let's see what else. Can you talk about the different areas in Botswana regarding development business and the potential future, minerals, attractions? Yeah, okay. So here's the deal in Botswana. So historically, Botswana, since 1966, before 66, there was only one thing in Botswana that anybody had any remote interest in, and that was cattle. Cattle remains important. Botswana has a special arrangement with the European Union in which it exports beef to the European Union and has been doing that for a long time. And that's a significant thing for Botswana. Now, beef is important for Botswana not simply because it's a contributor to GDP. Its percentages, I don't know the total off the top of my head here, but it's less than 10%, I think it's, but it's not insignificant. It's 3% or something like that. But it's important to Botswana because beef employs a large number of people who are working cattle ranching, cattle herding on the cattle post in remote areas of the country. And so it plays an important role in keeping people employed. And also, of course, in Southern Africa, those who know the region, we know that cattle are important for a lot of Africans culturally. And so having a cattle post, a cattle ranch is important culturally for a lot of people, but also economically, it makes a difference. So the cattle industry is important, but it's always at risk from Namibia and more importantly from Zimbabwe from hoof and mouth disease coming across the border. So they're very careful about agriculturally protecting their herds in Botswana. Not always successful, but they place a premium on it. So the beef industry is important in Botswana. Also, beyond diamonds, which came in 66, and so that's been a big part of it. You also have nickel and you have copper mining in Botswana, and Botswana has vast reserves of bituminous coal under the soil of the Kalahari. And on top of that, which they found out last decade or so, is that they have vast coal bed methane. So methane gas, which burns a lot cleaner than the coal would, could be potentially piped out to use power stations. One of the arguments I made for Botswana going back 15 years ago now, and still continue to this day, is instead of relying on the Chinese to build unreliable power plants that are based off of coal or oil, which they're using coal for the most part, that the government of Botswana should be giving tenders to reputable companies to build power plants and use coal bed methane to fire them, and then expanding their grid and selling the surplus electricity to its neighbors. Botswana should be a net exporter of electricity in southern Africa and be making a lot of money off electricity. That is a market it should be in. It has coal bed methane and coal reserves that will last it for centuries, which it could use to make a lot of money and invest the profits off that wisely and employ a number of people. So the coal industry is there, but it's underutilized. Not much coal is mined in Botswana at this point. Of course, we talk about tourism, which normally occupies about 16% of the gross domestic product of Botswana. Um, but today, of course, the tourism industry is in freeze. It's locked down, so it's not really contributing anything for the most part. Beyond that, there has been a push to diversify the economy. You see things like service industry that are gaining traction in Botswana. There's a delivery company that's similar to DHL. It's Botswana based. I think it's called Cheetah. And that company is started by a woman who used to work for DHL, who's a Motswana in the country. And she started it, also got assistance from the government under their small business grant system. And it became quite successful and is a nationwide delivery service now. But that has limitations. The country of 2.2 million people, there's only so much you can do there with an economy of around 20 billion or less. But there are other opportunities. And things I've argued for a long time for Botswana is that it should be a producer, a manufacturer of pharmaceuticals. At a minimum, it ought to be able to make off-label stuff, the generic drugs like the Indian market does. There's no reason that Botswana can't be a producer of that. Financial services, IT services, these are all things that Botswana could excel at, and they're also higher margin. When you sell financial services, when you sell IT services, your capital outlays potentially can be much lower. And as a consequence, you can make a lot more money off the higher margins. I mean, Bill Gates is wealthy because we bought his crappy software, and his crappy software comes with incredible margins. Apple makes a lot of money and no one complains about Apple. But when a petrol station makes 2% profit off of selling petrol, people lose their minds. But they have no problem buying an iPod that has 68% profit on every iPod sold. 68%. Those are incredibly large margins, and no one criticizes Apple for what I consider to be unbelievably outrageous prices for their products. No one criticizes them, but they're happy to criticize a retailer who sells, clothing at a few dollars or a few rands higher and makes a little bit of profit. People don't see the bigger picture. But Botswana has a lot of potential to move into higher margin segments of the economy: financial services, pharmaceuticals, even education potentially. Botswana has a long history with Lim Kok Weng University. I believe it's based in Malaysia, and they have a campus there in Botswana, in addition to the other higher education that's in Botswana, like the University of Botswana. But there's potential that Botswana could become a hub for education. And it could be a hub for distance education if it did it properly. But it requires vision on the part of the government, a strategic vision, a long-term vision, and that requires the government to be thinking about things beyond education, beyond pharmaceuticals, beyond IT, but also power. Electricity is a strategic issue. Look at the disaster in South Africa with Eskom, what a mess it is, and the impact that Eskom has had on its neighbors. Before I moved to Botswana in 2008, no one ever had a generator, unless you were in the bush, because electricity was reliable. Botswana produced 25% of its own consumption, and then it got the rest either from Mozambique or South Africa, mostly from South Africa through the power pool. But what happened when I arrived there in 2008 after leaving Liberia is that Eskom was in trouble. The mining sector was growing in the Platinum Belt in the Northwest, and the number of people getting access to electricity in informal settlements had increased. And so the demand for electricity was growing significantly in South Africa. At the same time, in the High Veld, the ANC, trying to comply with climate objectives, decided to shutter several coal-fired power plants to reduce South African emissions, which are quite high on a per capita basis. So shutting down coal-fired power plants, and then one of the two reactors was damaged at Koeberg Nuclear Facility in the Western Cape, and so suddenly the whole country had all kinds of power problems. The impact of that, South Africa can no longer export enough energy to its neighbors. Now, when Zimbabwe wasn't paying for electricity, you just turn off the electricity. They're not paying, they don't get it. But Botswana was paying its electricity bills. So people paying their bills and then not getting electricity because of inept, incompetent, piss poor strategic leadership on the part of Eskom and the African National Congress, that's the impact. So since 2000, I've been advising people in Botswana to build power plants. Let's see, how many power plants will then power plants in Botswana be mostly coal? Yeah, well, they could be coal, and that's what I was arguing for a long time, Christoph. Christoph's saying then power plants in Botswana will be mostly coal. That was a position, but as I discovered in the last decade or so, there are significant deposits of coal bed methane. So this is the methane gas that comes out of the coal that's formed in the soil, and it sits above that, and you can release that by drilling down, piping into it, and burn the methane. So you don't even have to dig the coal up. Now, the reserves of coal bed methane have been estimated to be a long period of time. So you could build a gas-fired power plant, which is much cleaner than burning coal, and you could provide power for all of Botswana, meet all of its needs, and also supply Namibia, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and more importantly, South Africa, where people have money to pay for things. Namibia does too. Anyway, so that could happen. Let's see what else here. So, all right, let me continue on with this. So, back to where I was at. So, power should be something that Botswana exports. That's something you can produce. And most people don't think about it that way. But electricity is a market. And if you use it properly, you can make money. So think about the integrated process there. You mine coal bed methane or coal in Botswana. You employ people to do that. You have to import some of the material, but some material can be produced locally, and you have local companies or regional companies that work there to produce the energy. And you build a power plant, whoever builds it for you, and then you burn the energy that you produce. So you're buying it from your own supplier within the country, so no currency is leaving the country. You don't have to spend hard currency to power your power plant. You produce electricity, you satisfy your entire market, no brownouts in Botswana, 100% of power needs are met by these plants, and then you have a surplus, which you can sell to your neighbors. Now you're earning hard currency on the electricity you're producing rather than relying on sending money to your neighbors. That alone would flip the equation and produce a lot more wealth in Botswana and employ a number of people, several thousand at a minimum. So this is the sort of strategic vision that countries lack in Africa, but not just in Africa. And this I find very frustrating. It is more complicated than what I'm making it appear to be, but it is not that complicated, ladies and gentlemen. It just requires a lot of work and it requires effort. But we keep seeing national development plans talking about diversifying the economy in Botswana, but it just doesn't happen, not to the degree that it needs to. Now, the one place it has been diversified is in the financial sector. There's been a number of efforts there and some success there. But I think I've answered your question, Christoph. Does that answer it well? There's other things that can be done, but I think that covers most of it. The retail sector will not be large. You're not going to have any major retailers. Now, there's an exception. Choppies, which is a supermarket chain, is a Botswana-based company, based in Botswana. I think it started in Ramotswa, but it is also located in Zimbabwe and in South Africa, particularly Northwest Province, just adjacent to Botswana. Choppies is a big supermarket chain, and it's a Botswana-based one. And the Cresta hotel chain is also based in Botswana. They have hotels in Botswana and in Zimbabwe, but Cresta, decent hotel chain. So, the tourism industry is another potential marketplace or market for Botswana. You want to have something that you can have a domestic market you can rely on, but since your domestic market will always be small, relatively speaking, Botswana's not going to have 50 million people. If it does, where's the water going to come from? It's always going to be a small market, people-wise, but it can be a market that can reach beyond its borders. But build yourself a base so you're financially sound, and then expand beyond there. And for those in South Africa who are looking to do business and frustrated by racist, race-based legislation like BEE, who are frustrated by that, I encourage you to take a look at Botswana, Namibia, but Botswana, especially if you're in the Gauteng province or Northwest, it's right on your doorstep. It's a good place to go and do business and take a look at it. It's part of the Southern African Customs Union, so that reduces trade barriers. And of course, it's part of SADC. Let's see what else. The problem all over Africa is that the local people often do not have the skills or the drive to maintain or expand the industries. Well, yes, that is a problem, Christoph, in much of Africa, but it's now been 60 years since independence for a lot of countries. I mean, Ghana in 1957. At what point do countries take responsibility for this? Now, a lot of countries have the talented people who can actually do these things, but they're not there because they've gone abroad for a lot of reasons: corruption, limited opportunities, small markets, a lot of reasons. Zimbabwe would be a far healthier country without ZANU-PF running it, first off. But beyond that, if 4 million Zimbabweans living in South Africa, UK, Canada, and the United States would come back to Zimbabwe and contribute their vast talents, engineering, finance, business, education, science, to Zimbabwe instead of to all our countries. This leads to outside countries investing in building infrastructures, but then they fail. Yeah, well, the problem with infrastructure in Africa is the mindset that I've talked about for decades in Africa, and that's the build it and forget about it. I can point to, the Chinese are getting all this great press before COVID-19. China is investing in Africa. The Chinese like us. The Chinese care about us. No, the Chinese have an excess of capital because their unfair trade practices have accumulated capital they shouldn't have accumulated by defrauding others and closing their market to other people's goods. That's one reason. So they have excess capital, they have excess trained engineers that they can't put to work. They've built so many cities that nobody lives in and highways that go nowhere and empty office space that they need to put these engineers, civil engineers, to work somewhere. And Africa presents an opportunity for them to export their excess labor that they don't need in China and their excess capital to make it work for them. It's not that they love Africa. They'll tell people they love Africa, but that's not what it's about. But what people forget is that this infrastructure has been built in many countries. Yes, infrastructure has been built. Now, it isn't the infrastructure that's needed today, but Africa's population was 1/3 the size it is today at independence. Go back to the 1960s, and we're talking about 320, 360 million people in Africa. Now we're talking 1.3 billion people in Africa and growing to 2.3 to 2.6 by 2050. So the amount of infrastructure that's needed today is far greater. Not to mention that the world is very different today than it was in 1960, 1970. 1960, even in America, not everybody had an automobile. Certainly not a second or third automobile, and nobody had internet, and the number of ports needed were much smaller because the amount of goods traded based on container-based shipping was far smaller, and trade played a far smaller role in everyday life than it does today. So today the infrastructure needs are far greater. But if you go back to the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, infrastructure was built across Africa by Western firms. And then it was neglected by African countries, in large measure because oftentimes infrastructure was state-owned, and the state did not maintain the infrastructure. And that's part of the problem. You have to have a vested interest in something in order to maintain it. It's the tragedy of the commons, ladies and gentlemen. You build it and you forget about it. So I can point to endless roads and port facilities that were built by others and have been neglected by governments in Africa. Now, if they're privately owned and people profit from the existence of them, there's an incentive to keep them up. So anyway, that's part of the problem with infrastructure in Africa. So the Chinese are getting all the press about as if they're the first person to ever arrive in Africa. Well, the colonial powers built infrastructure. Now, arguably, much of the infrastructure was usually designed to take the resources from the colonies and ship it to the metropolitan back to the colonial headquarters. Okay, fine. But they still built ports in Dar es Salaam, the Germans. They still built railroads in Namibia, the Germans. They still built airports in countries in Africa. They still built roads for places for those things, and at least was a basis. Infrastructure will always be a challenge for every government around the world. When Trump came to office, we heard whining on the left and on the right about the infrastructure. America's infrastructure is crumbling. Well, that's utter nonsense. First off, the country is massive. We have more roads than any place on the planet, and we have to maintain millions of miles of roads. That in itself is a challenge and is a full-time job. But I can go 2 miles from here where I walk on a country road and walk across a bridge that has a plaque on it when it was erected in 1920, 1921. I can find a dozen bridges like that. They're all structurally sound, and they're still in place from a century ago. We can and do put good infrastructure in. But the challenge is when you have intensive use of infrastructure, you have to plan and maintain, upgrade it. One thing I'll always give the German government credit for is that the German government has always, at the national level and the state or provincial level, been very forward thinking, especially about infrastructure, and especially when it comes to roads and highways. The Germans always have a plan for when they will renew the surface and resurface every road. And they do it on a regular schedule. Now, it may not be convenient for you and I when we're trying to go past the Frankfurt airport, but for 20 years, I saw perpetual highway construction in and around the Frankfurt International Airport because it's a major nexus of highways. Autobahns go north and south and east and west, and lots of clover leaves that connect all the roads. So that section of the road a part of it within 3 to 5 kilometers of the airport was always under construction over a 20-year period and always will be because of the volume and the weight of traffic that passes over those roads. It's necessary. But most countries don't think that way. They don't plan that way and they don't think about the true cost of infrastructure. And that's the case in Africa. Botswana, for its infrastructure, which is pretty darn good, also neglects infrastructure. The road that goes from Francistown goes to the north and then splits to go to the, let me see if I do this right for you guys, to the west. That should be the west for you. To the west to go to Maun and the Okavango Delta has had lots of potholes and been in disrepair at different stages over the last 20 years. But the road going north to Kasane has been far worse. I traveled that road 20 years ago and I thought I was going to need severe dental work when I arrived in Kasane. Absolutely atrocious was the condition of the road. And this is a country that has good infrastructure and maintains it. Every country faces these challenges, but you need a strategic plan. And that starts at the local level and working out from local municipalities, counties, districts to states, provinces, and the national government. All need to work in unison and all bear responsibility. But in some places, even including in this country, people expect that someone else is responsible. So people expect the federal government to foot the bill for roads that run through their area. In some cases, that's appropriate if it's a national highway, an interstate, but not every case is that appropriate. But nonetheless, we do that. Let's see. Gosh, Christoph has a few things. This leads to outside country. Okay, here's that. History and politics, unfortunately, drive the agenda on the African continent. That's true, but that doesn't mean it can't be changed. And it does apply to all the countries, yes. The countries that do well are those that have one collective interest and agree on most topics. For instance, culture, religion, education, politics. That's a fair point, Christoph. If you have national consensus, it's far easier to do things. Japan is a good example. The Japanese infrastructure is amazing, and they live in a highly dangerous location geologically. I mean, Japan sits on fault lines that, they're lucky that the islands don't just fall into the ocean at some point. We've seen earthquakes and, of course, the tsunamis that come with that and other natural disasters in Japan. But Japan has a cohesive national identity. I think one of the reasons why Botswana has been successful, people say they're all the same people, but they're not. That's a myth. Now, there are many people, about 85% of the population is closely related, but from the Tswana-speaking peoples, but there are multiple divisions within those, the Bangmawatos and many other groups within Botswana. The Kalangas live there, who come from Zimbabwe. You have Coloreds, you have San, the Bushmen, or Basarwa as they're called in Botswana. You have Europeans, about 7 and 9% of the population, and in some places even higher. You go to the Okavango, Maun, you have a very large European population that runs the tourism industry at the camps in the bush and in the Delta, and also the hotels there, and a lot of them are pilots. The huge volume of air traffic up there. So Baroni also has about 5 to 7% of the population are white or European. So you have very diverse, despite what people say. But one of the reasons that Botswana has been successful, my argument, my thesis on this is that they successfully crafted a national identity. So if you go to Botswana and you talk to them, people will say, "Ke Motswana." I am a Motswana. Motswana being the singular, the plural being Botswana, B-A-T, not Botswana with the O. The country is Botswana. The people are Botswana, plural. But a Motswana is an individual. And someone will say, "Hey, Ke Motswana. I am a Motswana." And people take pride in that. People take pride in the national flag, the symbols of the pula, which is rainfall, which represents the currency and good fortune in Botswana. And people take pride in the country because they forged the national identity since the very inception in 1966. Being a Motswana doesn't mean you're white, it doesn't mean you're a Bushman, it doesn't mean you're black, doesn't mean you're Kalanga, it doesn't mean you're a Mangwato. It means you are a Botswana. Now, every country has success in forming national identity when it's time to get on a soccer pitch and the FIFA World Cup. Suddenly we're all Nigerians, suddenly we're all English, or we're all whatever. But the reality is that some countries are more successful at forging a national identity. I will tell you the countries where I've seen the most patriotism that I've ever seen in my life, and I'm not talking about sports, but I'm talking about just in general, where people are proud of being from that country and they tell people about it, or they display flags, or they make it clear. And that is the United States, of course. People are very proud of being American, despite the leftist efforts to undermine our national cohesion and unity. Yes, that was a dig. And Sweden. And you can't go anywhere in Sweden and not find a Swedish flag flying on somebody's property proudly, and people are very proud of being Swedish. They identify with it. But Sweden is comprised of many different ethnic groups that became Swedish at some point, and they forged a national identity. Now, that's much longer than America, long before us, and much earlier than Botswana. Botswana is another country that has forged a national identity, and that cohesion and unity plays a big role in national development and where people go. But you can have a country with diverse ethnic groups and have success. Indonesia, despite many challenges, has become a wildly successful country with multiple ethnicities, a lot of languages, over 1,000 languages, I think it is, something like that. And Indonesia, and of course, it's a whole collection of these large islands, disparate, unconnected physically, yet it has become a successful country over its history, and despite the fact that it had totalitarian leadership for a period of time. So it can be done. I'm not holding up Indonesia as an example. I'm just saying it is an example. So let's see what else we got here. Yes, they selected Tswana and English. So Botswana made a prudent decision that Tswana would be official language and English as well. But people, the national media, the government, things are all done in English. So people speak both languages for the most part. Um, Now, South Africa's unique position given its history and more diverse than probably most. Yeah, South Africa is unique. This is one of the reasons why I fell in love with the country a long time ago. Diverse population, fantastic array of languages, culture, ethnicity, appearance, and history. It's a fantastic place. Hey, Coolio, welcome. Glad you can make it. So yeah, no, South Africa is in a unique position, and it could do so much. A lot of Afrikaans-speaking South Africans are frustrated at the efforts by the government to push Afrikaans to the side, and I too am frustrated by that. But by the same token, I don't agree that Afrikaans should be the national language in South Africa. That was a different time. I actually, this you'll say, well, you're biased because you speak English, but we adopted English too. Remember, we were colonized here, and our ancestors came and colonized us. And not all of them spoke English, but we all adopted English. English is the international language, the language of trade, the language of science. Research papers are done overwhelmingly in English. 85, 90% of all research papers in chemistry, science, mathematics are done in English these days. Aviation, everyone speaks English around the world to fly, to talk to air traffic control, to navigate. It's a language of trade, and so it is a lingua franca for the world, and it is a language that people can learn, and it's ubiquitous. It's the most widely spoken second language, I believe, on the planet, not Spanish, but English. Spanish is larger from first language speakers. But anyway, my point with this is that it was appropriate for South Africa to adopt it for documentation and for government business to be conducted in English. But when we see ministers start speaking in Zulu, that's not right. And they shouldn't be speaking Afrikaans either. You can't expect people to know 11 languages. That's ludicrous. Now, it's okay for the government to teach people in the language, their median language. I have no problem with that. But South Africa should have adopted English as its official language, and then they could have adopted the other 10 languages as South African cultural languages. Languages that get protected, they receive effort to keep them going, and that are a focus. And you can ask for documents to be published in those, but to expect everyone to speak Xhosa or Zulu or Pidi, that's just ludicrous. That's insane. And Afrikaans, the same sort of thing. So yeah, South Africa has unique opportunity, but I would argue that in many respects the government has been squandering South Africa's diversity. In fact, the government has been turning groups against each other for a number of years now, and it's quite distressing. It's one of the reasons why about 2 years ago I finally said, wait a second, I really can't condone what the ANC is doing here. I mean, I've been arguing that there are well-intentioned people in the African National Congress, but the number of well-intentioned people seem to be disappearing, or they're very silent. I mean, how can anybody who participated in the CODESA summit convention to end the apartheid regime, and all the parties agreed, now renege on the concept of land compensation and the land issue, and lie about it and not tell the truth about what was discussed there and what has been done on land thus far, what really needs to be done, and how the ANC has been neglecting the issue, and that there's no reason for expropriation without compensation. The government can pay for land instead of buying jet fighters, diesel-powered submarines, cruisers, building mansions in the foothills of the Drakensberg for corrupt, disgraced former heads of state, selling off the National Oil Reserve, sending all your ministers in first class all over the world, burning through money, paying huge staffs, extravagant luxury because it's our turn to eat. No, no. That money could be better spent buying land, distributing to people who want to own land, who don't have it, and more importantly, restoring those who did not have their land because it was taken from them from 1910 until 1994. Anyway, but that's another topic, and one that I'll be talking with Ronaldo Hose about on his program. So let's see what else we got over here. It's very difficult to get people under one consensus, and in my opinion, you will not realize soon or in the next few hundred years. Well, consensus is not the answer there, Christoph, and that's the problem. So one of the problems with the African Union is the African Union can only do things by consensus. You can't meet and say, okay, we have one outlier that doesn't want to do it, so we're not going to do it. You cannot function that way. There will always be someone who is contrarian. Excuse me. And so we can't have contrarians and come to a conclusion. You have to have the ability to have a majority or plurality come to a conclusion, preferably a majority. So yeah, that's a real problem. The Americans are so proud to fly their national flag. I'd be shocked if you can find 10 houses in the whole South African flying flag. Yeah, and the South African flag is actually quite popular, Ice. Yeah, people like that flag. It's an unusual flag. I don't have it behind me. I had it for another stream, but it's an unusual flag. And it was a product of reconciliation. A lot of people are actually proud of it. Certainly, no offense to those who cling to the old flag, but the old flag I thought was bizarre because it was a mixture of miniature flags from the Transvaal and the Free State, with the Dutch royal colors on the thing, and I never really liked that flag. I never got much out of it. This flag is much more artistic and represents South Africa very well, the South Africa of today. But yeah, you don't see the flag flying proudly from people's private residences, but you do in Sweden. You won't find a farmstead in Sweden that doesn't have a Swiss flag or a Swedish flag flying out front. Yeah, Swiss flag, no, Swedish flag. So yeah, absolutely, Americans are proud. People in my neighborhood fly the flag. Yep, absolutely, and they take it down at night unless it's properly lit. It has to come down at night. So let's see what else. Coolio says he can agree with ICE that nobody I know of has a flag. I haven't seen them. I've seen a few in the Cape Town area, in the Western Cape, in Stellenbosch. But often I wonder if that's some barrister's office, some lawyer's office, and not actually a private residence. So anyway, ANC is really corrupt. They've done a lot of good for the people, but I don't think it'll be worse for the long term. Well, Coolio, I'd say that the ANC did a lot of good early on, but it's become too focused on state capture and pervasive corruption, and now blaming others for their failures. Now, there will always be some share of the blame for the apartheid system for certain things, for at least for the foreseeable future. But to blame apartheid for everything that's gone wrong in the last 26 years is just ludicrous. And that's what the ANC does on a frequent basis. Christoph, the background of the Afrikaans people are diverse, rooted from the wars in the Netherlands, France, Spain. This was the idea of the old regime about the national language that was, yeah, no, it was. Okay, so Afrikaans. So yeah, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here with a lot of folks, but of course, the Afrikaans people, I mean, there's the Afrikaans speaking people are, first off, they're not white, they're white and mixed race. Those, and also some black Africans and Indians actually speak it as a first language, which is not that well known, but about 180,000, 190,000 Indians, Asians, their first language is Afrikaans. Yeah, absolutely. Out of the million plus, about 180,000, that's their first language. And for the colored population, overwhelmingly, that is Afrikaans. For about half the white population, it's Afrikaans. But the white Afrikaans population themselves are not Dutch. That's a portion of their ethnic makeup. But when you look at DNA studies for South Africans of Afrikaan origin or Afrikaners, you'll find that the plurality of DNA contribution to the Afrikaans community is actually German, then comes Dutch, and then comes French Huguenot, from those who fled after the Edict of Nantes was revoked in 1685 and fled before and after that around Europe, largely to the Netherlands, the Spanish Netherlands, and to Berlin, because the French or the Prussian king invited them there. So we have 50,000 French Huguenots who survived the massacres and the theft of their property and the, not genocide, but the effort to stamp out the Huguenots, got to Berlin, and thousands got to the Netherlands, and a number of them moved to the Western Cape. So you later had far larger numbers of Germans who came in, who mixed in that community and assimilated very quickly. And Afrikaans grew from the Dutch of the 17th century, influenced by Malay and by Khoi and San and other African languages like Xhosa and others, and it amalgamated over time. But it wasn't even known as Afrikaans until about a century or so ago, a little over a century ago. So yeah, it's not even simple there. The idea was the Afrikaans was a way to coalesce. And in fact, was it Simon van der Stel early on used Dutch, which became Afrikaans, as the basis to integrate white society in Western Cape. That's absolutely right, Christoph. That was the intent, to coalesce around that language. Now, of course, when the Brits pushed the Dutch out of the Western Cape for good, around 1805, I think it was, they had taken over briefly, and the Dutch came back, but around 1805, it became British control. Of course, this led to the Great Trek in the 1830s as Boers, Afrikaners, nascent Afrikaners tried to escape from British control, moving to the north and northeast. The British took over, and of course, then you have a large influx of English speakers who come in. And then you have later immigrants who come in who were not first language English speakers, but a lot of them migrated to naturally learning English. And so you have a larger English speaking white South African community than you do Afrikaans. But anyway, so there you go. Let's see what else. just like the U.S., people that struggled against the old world and then fought years of wars in North American continent, but then decided to adopt one language in English. Well, yeah, well, yes and no. So in the U.S., the deal was that at independence, after we earned independence from the United Kingdom in the Peace of Paris in 1783, the position in the Congress, which had been the Continental Congress, and then under the Articles of Confederation, was to adopt a national language. And what should it be? Because a large percentage of people living in the colonies became states were actually German, and a number of Scotch Irish, some of whom spoke Celtic languages, but mostly German was the other language. In Pennsylvania here, the majority of people spoke German, not English, even though it was an English colony. And so the decision was made that we should speak English, but we never got an official language. Embarrassingly, we're one of the few large countries around the world that doesn't have a national language. So let's see, just like the U.S., people thought that strong. Okay, so Coolio, as a South African, what I really wished would happen when I was in primary school is that they should have taught Xhosa or Zulu with our two compulsory languages because I believe the lack of understanding each other is also part of the divide. Well, that's interesting, Coolio. If you don't mind sharing, you tell me where you're from. I'm curious why you want to learn Xhosa or Zulu. But it's interesting because a lot of people, especially Black South Africans, are like, well, whites don't speak African languages. Well, that's not been my experience, particularly with Afrikaners. I mean, the number of Afrikaners whom I know who speak a second language, particularly an African language, is quite large as a percentage of the population. Now, this is attributed to a number of things. Those who work on farms typically have farm hands who speak another language. So you have to be conversant in that language to be able to talk to your farm hands oftentimes. And also the propensity in South Africa for you all to have domestic workers. You have people who live in your homes and take care of your children. They often speak a different language. And this has historically been a case. So a lot of South African children grow up with a Xhosa speaking or a Tswana speaking nanny who manages the house, and they're chastised or spoken to in that language, and they learn that just as rapidly or quickly as they learn English. So you do find a lot of people in South Africa, European, white South Africans who speak a second language, oftentimes an African language, not just English. So let's see what else we got here. But yeah, these things should be offered in school. I think that would make a difference. But the bigger issue here is if the government simply stop dividing people on this artificial basis of race and making everything racial. That would go a long way to helping people. Regardless of where you sit on the fence, when it comes to race relations, the average race relations amongst people, a lot of people I think would argue that in many measures that South Africans get along far better and far more easily than they ever did, despite the government. And I think it's an interesting thing. But that's a view. That's a personal view. You can agree or disagree. That's cool. The old Roman Empire, yeah, the language played the same role. Yep. When we were children, to learn a different language much easier. Yeah, when you're a child, it's very easy. I learned French in my 30s, and it was a challenge. It was my sixth or fifth language, and it was challenging. Um, so can we please see you full screen? Okay, I can do that, Coolio. Sorry. I guess if you're listening on a phone or something like that, okay, here we go. Is that too big now? There we go. That's close to full screen, so we'll do that. All right. Okay. And this migration happened in Africa with a few European powers driving back black tribes down the African continent. Yep. Coolio says, yes, they do speak African languages, those that live on farms in the Karoo or in KwaZulu-Natal. Yeah, but not just there. Also in Mpumalanga and in Northwest, the same sort of thing. I mean, I know a number of farmers in Northwest, white Afrikaans-speaking farmers, and they all speak Tswana, Afrikaans and English. So why many Black Africans in Southern Africa originate from North. Well, yeah, all of the Bantu people, none of them come from South Africa or Zimbabwe or Botswana. None of them. The Bantu peoples come from the region of what is now Cameroon in West Africa, and they migrated from there starting about 2,000 years ago, maybe a little bit before that. They went to the west, and then they looped over towards the east, and they wound up getting to Uganda, and then from Uganda, traveling south down the Rift Valley and populating East Africa and then eventually Southern Africa. Those are the Bantu people. And the Bantu peoples got to Southern Africa around 1800 years ago, thereabouts, populated Zimbabwe and displaced the San, the Bushmen, although there's still about 5,000 Bushmen living in Zimbabwe today, but they displaced them. And then the Bushmen moved further to more marginalized land into Botswana, into the Kalahari. I mean, they didn't live there just because it was a cool place to live. I mean, it's very difficult to live in the Kalahari, but they wound up living there because they were different and they were weaker militarily, and they were pushed aside by larger numbers of cattle-based Bantu peoples who came south. And eventually they kept going south and became the Swazi, the Zulu at some point. The Ndebele shot off with them later on. And of course, the Xhosa working their way down. But by the time Europeans arrived in South Africa for permanent settlement, which took place in 1652 in Cape Town area, at that point, the Xhosa people were largely had reached the Great Fish River or thereabouts and were moving westward slowly. Eventually, the Europeans moved from the Cape further eastward, eventually ran into the Xhosa, fought a series of wars in the 19th century, about 8, 9 different wars with the Xhosa. And sometimes the Xhosa came out ahead, sometimes the Europeans came out ahead. But eventually, the Europeans then started moving further north, as the Europeans being the Boers, the farmers, the Afrikaners, who didn't want anything to do with British rule because they felt it to be onerous. And so they started moving to the north. And then they happened to move into the Free State and what became the Transvaal in a period of time historically, which was an anomaly. These areas were largely free or devoid of peoples because of a large-scale conflict that was taking place with the formation of the Zulu kingdom in what was Natal, or today KwaZulu-Natal. And this violent forming of the Zulu nation by the absorption of others or the conquest of others led to people who didn't want to be absorbed or defeated to flee. And you can't go into the Drakensberg. These mountains are impassable in many respects, and you can't live there for many people. So people went around the Drakensberg or further south along the coast, but mostly around the Drakensberg and up into the Transvaal. And then they displaced other peoples. And so when the Boers and Afrikaners moved into this region, there weren't many people living there. A lot of them had fled. The Basotho had fled further in towards the mountains to avoid the conflict with the Ndebele and others. And then the Tswana speakers had kind of displaced a little bit further to the west. And so there's a little bit of a gap as these people moved in. So there, in the mythology of the Afrikaner story, part of it is that they found unoccupied land. Well, in the Western Cape, the land was never unoccupied. There were Khoi and San there from the beginning. It's just that they were either assimilated or wiped out as a consequence of European colonization. So that was not unoccupied. And as they went further east, there was thinly populated land, but it wasn't entirely unpopulated. And they eventually ran into Black Africans, Bantus. And then going north, the land was largely unoccupied, but it was a historical anomaly. It's not like it had been unoccupied for 1,000 years. So truth and fiction in every story. And so there's a little bit about the history there. Let's see what else. Got some comments since I've been talking. The problem is that no one chose their place of birth, skin color, gender, and economic circumstances. Well, that's exactly right, Christoph, and that's why those are things that you cannot discriminate. On Ronaldo Ho's program earlier, for those who are watching it, that stream, I heard the conversation between Ronaldo and Germ, and they were talking about discrimination, and Germ was defining discrimination. Ronaldo disagreed. He said that's not discrimination. Somebody said that's differentiation. I don't agree with that. We discriminate each and every day, and there's nothing wrong with discrimination. Yes, that's right. I just said it. There's nothing wrong with discrimination. We exist as a species because we were discriminating. We were very discriminatory in our choice of where we bedded down for the night, which saber-toothed tigers to avoid, what food to eat, what poisonous food not to eat, who to mate with, who not to mate with. That was discrimination. Discrimination is perfectly okay. Discrimination based on artificial bases that people cannot control is what is wrong and what is morally wrong. So the skin pigmentation of a person, if you discriminate against them because of their appearance, that's wrong. If you discriminate against someone because of their religious beliefs, that's wrong. If you discriminate against someone because they're a pedophile and they've molested children and they've moved in next to you, well, that's not wrong. It's maybe not fair, but it is not wrong. That is a sound practice to discriminate against people. Now, when the government discriminates against people, that is morally and legally wrong, and it should be legally wrong everywhere. But in South Africa, we currently have laws that make it perfectly legal to discriminate against people based on their racial identification. Now, how ludicrous is that for the born frees of South Africa to be told they live in a multiracial society in which the government represents everyone, only to graduate from school and try to start a business and be told you can't have a government tender or you can't work for this company because they want to comply with BEE standards and you're not owned by a Black African. That's discrimination. That's wrong. So discriminating is what keeps us healthy and alive. It's how we discriminate is what matters. And that's what often gets lost in the discussion. It's kind of like the discussion of racism and bigotry. People talk about racism and bigotry all the time. And from my perspective, they conflate the two, they mix them up. A racist is someone that's in their heart. They truly believe that one race is better than another. Now, my argument to that is that there's just one race, the human race, Homo sapiens. Class, order, family, kingdom, phylum, genesis, species. Wait, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genesis, species. That's the animal kingdom sequence. And we don't get to humans until we get to the last one, species. We're all from the same species. Our differences are artificial. We create them. culturally. Race is a cultural creation. Yes, people look different, but the DNA between a Zulu in South Africa and myself is infinitesimal, very small, very small. Anyway, let's see what else. I'm behind here. People find themselves stuck in a country. Yeah, some people feel that way. Coolio says, I really wish we were the rainbow nation that the world sees us as. In most cases, we are, and there's beautiful diversity in many parts of the country, but there will always be that one person. Yeah, yeah, Coolio. Yeah, absolutely. The world still sees South Africa through the eyes of 1994 and millions of people standing in line to vote for the first time, and President Mandela calling for reconciliation in the rainbow nation. And that really isn't South Africa today. It may be on the individual level, but certain political parties go out of their way to divide people and bifurcate society. And that's a sad development, particularly since the modern South Africa, the democratic South Africa, is founded on the basis of the Freedom Charter, ideals which represented all South Africans regardless of race, color, creed, or religion. 1955 in Kliptown, the Declaration of the Freedom Charter, of which the African National Congress was a participant under the Congress of the People, not the we hate Zuma, we're Becky fans, Congress of the People political party that exists today, a small minor party, but rather the genuine Congress of the People from which they appropriated the name. This was an amalgamation of liberation era movements and those opposed to apartheid who called for a non-racial society. Yet today we have politicians who constantly racialize. Just look at Julius Malema. Okay, Christoph, people can't use the categories that they're born into, whether, yeah, they can't. No, you can't help the circumstances of your birth, you know? And it should not be a matter. Everyone should have equal opportunity, access to equal opportunity. The problem is that around the world, people on the political left try to create equality of outcomes. And that's not right. I don't agree with it. Equality of outcomes. Why should somebody that's lazy and doesn't work get the same result that I get if I work hard and I study hard? Why should somebody that has no original idea profit from the hard work that someone else has an original idea? That's not fair. Think about it. It's really not something that should be happening, in my view. People should be able to benefit from their hard efforts, their labor. Now, what we should all have is equal opportunity and access to things. So, for instance, here in America, when I went to university in the 1980s, I don't want to make comments about how old people are, but when I started university in the 1980s, I could not afford university. I didn't come from a wealthy family. I lived in poverty on a small farm in Appalachia, a chronically economically depressed part of the country that runs the length of the East Coast and the Appalachian Mountains. And I didn't have the money to go to university. So I applied for national federal grants based on income, parents' income, and I applied for state grants and I applied for a student loan. And I qualified for all those because the income level was too low. So I entered university based on my academic performance. I was accepted to university to a state school, a government-run school in Ohio, Ohio University. And I got there by working part-time, making money in the evenings, and also by these grants that allowed me to go because of low income. So one can make the argument that I had an equal opportunity to succeed. Now, others will say, well, yes, but you didn't have access to a car, you didn't have a laptop, you didn't have cell phones. No, none of that existed. But if I was that child today, I wouldn't have those things. Now, the opportunity that exists based on how your family performs and what it makes available to you is different than everyone having the same equal access. That's what I'm talking about. So equal access to university. So I went to university, I applied myself, I learned, and it paid off for me. But I didn't have those resources as a child. So equality of access and opportunity is what matters, not equality of outcomes. Trying to say that everyone's equal, we wouldn't have anyone named Elon Musk, who came up with PayPal and then SpaceX and then also Tesla. Amazing ideas. I take issue with Elon Musk from time to time, but we wouldn't have that. There's a reason Elon Musk is not in South Africa. He's a South African. He's in the United States because this is the birthplace of ideas and the germination of ideas and opportunity based on our system here. South Africa doesn't have the scale and doesn't have the opportunity under the political system that it's currently operating under, so the talent goes elsewhere. And we can name thousands of examples like Elon Musk who've come from abroad and come to our shores or gone to the United Kingdom or places in Europe or even Japan where they have better opportunities. So equal access and opportunity is what people really need. So let's see what else people are saying here. So Coolio, make sure we never forget the past and always pay for our ancestors' past mistakes and cruelty. Yeah, that's what people want to do. You know, it's a fascinating sort of situation. So for instance, it's interesting in America that a lot of people in America want to blame slavery on white people. But the problem with that is that Whites were also enslaved, particularly in the Caribbean, by the British. Irish were slaves, not indentured servants, but actual slaves. But the real problem with that is that the majority, not the plurality, the majority of people who are white in the United States today, their ancestors arrived here after the end of slavery. They didn't come until the late 19th century. That's the majority of our population is descended from people who came here in the 1880s, the 1890s, the 1900s, 1910s until First World War started. That's where the bulk of our population, our white population, came from. Whereas the bulk of America's black population has been here far longer, dating back to as early as 1619 in Jamestown, and then subsequently during the slave trade, and then even a small number of free blacks who came here on their own. So blaming white America for slavery is a ludicrous argument. First off, none of us participated in it, unless we're currently participating in it. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't know about it, we shouldn't avoid it, we shouldn't find it abhorrent, and we should learn the lessons of history and talk about it. Absolutely. But to hold people accountable, and then we'll hear the argument, well, you have an advantage, you got this, you got that. Well, that's no, that you can play the game forever. It's like land. You have to pick a reasonable point in time, and before that, things are just lost to history. It's a consequence of human interaction over history. If you want to be morally correct, then you treat people the same. Anyway, that's yeah, but blaming people for the sins of their ancestors is ludicrous. Here in America, historically, you were not held accountable for the sins of your father, and that was one of the nice things of America. You could always remake yourself. Even if you made mistakes in this country, you could restart, move somewhere else, and restart. People are forgiving as long as people are earnest in their remorse about their actions. Now, I'm not talking about murder and rape and things like that, but I'm talking about people making mistakes. And this is why we have so many people who fail in business repeatedly, but then ultimately become quite successful. Look at any billionaire in America, with the exception of Bill Gates, who seemed to got lucky out of the gate the first time. You look at any of the billionaires, and many of them had many failures. Oh, look at Richard Branson from Virgin. People admire Richard Branson immensely, but Richard Branson has failed more often than he succeeded. Virgin Cola, really? Doesn't exist anymore. He's had many business ventures that have failed, but he has been successful. He's a dynamic personality, and he has great ideas, great ingenuity, and he's a great leader, and he's successful. And I'm not even a fan of Richard Branson, but I can admit that about the guy. Let's see what else. It's driven so deep in our roots of South Africa, and I know it's something not to forget, but why should today's problems dictate being influenced by our past? Well, Coolio, to be fair, we do need to know where we come from, and we do need to understand things that affect the culture and environment where we're at. And that's important. But the thing is that we shouldn't be selective about this. So, for instance, you never hear about the fact that when the Afrikaners, the Boers, moved into the Free State, about 15,000 or so of them, 15, 25,000, migrated up there over about a 10-year period during the Great Trek. When they did that, they came into contact with an aggressive Bantu tribe, the Ndebele. And the Ndebele were an offshoot of the Zulu who didn't want to be part of that, and so they fled Natal and moved up into the High Veld. And they were attacking Black African tribes around there, the Basutu and many other smaller groups with names that are lost to history at this point, but they still exist. You can find them. What happened is that the Afrikaners were far less of a threat to many of these peoples than the Ndebele were. The Ndebele would attack and murder because they were going to homesteads and farmsteads. They would attack and murder the Boers and other Africans to steal their cattle, to take over control of the area they lived in, or to chase them away from areas they felt belonged to them. Well, we very seldom hear about the alliances formed between Afrikaners, Afrikaner commandos, Boer commandos, and Black African tribes to fight back and push the Ndebele back. There's a reason why Zimbabwe today is comprised of Ndebele and of Shona groups. The Shona being there long before the Ndebele only coming in the mid-19th century. And that's a consequence of the Mfukande that took place in Natal and spread to the Veld. This is a massive displacement of peoples, including the Ndebele, who were pushed up into the High Veld by the Zulu, fleeing from them. And then they were pushed into Zimbabwe by an alliance of Boers and local Black Africans, Tswana speakers and Basutu speakers in particular, who pushed them into what became Zimbabwe as they went all the way as far north as what today is Bulawayo, where Mzilikazi set up the Ndebele nation. So the fact that we don't discuss the full history and we neglect this and simply say that white Europeans, killed everybody, enslaved everybody, no, that's not the case. It's not the reason that there's people from Indonesia who are descended and part of the colored community in the Cape Town area is because the Europeans that arrived in the Cape tried to enslave the Khoisan and found out that it was ineffective and it didn't work. They wouldn't work. They made terrible slaves. And so they brought slaves in from what is today Indonesia, from the Dutch East Indies, into Cape Town to be slaves, domestic servants, and work small farms and stuff like that. And that was the early part of the genesis between Europeans, Malay slaves, who also brought Islam, by the way. It's the first introduction of Islam in South Africa was by Malays who came in, and then mixing with Khoisan and Europeans, and you have the colored community that we know today of approximately 6 to 8 million people in South Africa, plus a small population in Botswana, and a larger one in Namibia that descend from those people from the 17th century. Fascinating history. But these things are overlooked to simply put things in terms of white, black, European, African. Well, Afrikaners are Africans. I hate to break it to people. Anyway, but this is something that a lot of people are comfortable with, but it is the truth and the reality. Just a ghost. You did not study female. I must have missed something. Let me get back. I'm going to back up here. Coolio says, I wish. Okay, we already said that. And Ice says, I said that. Coolio. Okay, now I'm not that far behind. I thought I was further behind. Coolio, the past. This is from Christoph. The past should not drive the future, but it mostly does. Yeah, that's the natural thought pattern of humans. And identity politics, we identify, and that's just a natural condition for human beings. We identify with a group, a larger group, but we also come back into subgroups and work our way down. So that all plays a role in how we look at the world too. And so identity politics is something that politicians the world over use to get votes to themselves. If anyone's ever watched that television show, which is on Amazon, called Bosch, which is from the Michael Connelly series of novels, crime novels, he's a detective played by Titus Welliver. In that, you'll see this dynamic in which the deputy chief of police is going to become the chief of police, wants to run for mayor, and they want his support because he's very well known and popular in the black community because he's a black deputy chief and respected. And then, of course, they go to the ministers to get the black vote. And then, of course, the mayoral candidate is Hispanic, so he can get the Latino vote. And so the whole thing is divided along ethnicity, along bifurcating people and making alliances that way. It works to the advantage of political groups. And the African National Congress is a world-class Olympic sprinter when it comes to this in the last decade. Before that, they were a multiracial party committed to multiracial South Africa. But of late, they have been focused on dividing people. And for me, it all started with their ridiculous attacks on Helen Zille, personal attacks, and the misogynist attacks that came from members of parliament in the African National Congress who said unspeakable things about Helen Zille, a hero of the liberation era, the person who exposed the police murder of Steve Biko, the person who risked being banned and the safety of her family and being imprisoned for her efforts as a journalist during apartheid and her membership in the Black Sash organization. So for me, that's when it really started. And that was shameful what they did with Helen Zille, and it continues to this day. So identity politics works. It's shameful, it's sad, but it does work. Human beings naturally associate the like. It's interesting as you see that you see people who do that on an artificial basis like appearance, and it really is pathetic. I remember seeing a large number of Black Americans who would go to Ghana when I would travel there, and they couldn't understand why the Ghanaians didn't like them. And I would talk to Ghanaians, and I had some Ghanaian friends, Eddie Danton being one of them, who ran a medical program there. He used to live in America, and we were good friends. And he said, well, you have to understand, Chris, that most of these Black Americans who come here, they're arrogant. They think they're entitled to things, and they have opinions, and they behave like the arrogant American. And that's why they're not popular. Now, I'm not trying to condemn all Black Americans who moved to Ghana. There's some wonderful Black Americans who live there. But my point is that culturally, the Black Americans were not Ghanaians, but a lot of them acted and believed that, hey, Black like me, we're both Black, so we're the same. No, you're not. You're very different. You can be the same. You can share the same values, but the fact that you have the same skin pigmentation does not mean you share the same values. I'm not an Afrikaner. I may have some affinity or interest in the Afrikaans community, the Afrikaner community, but I'm not an Afrikaner. I'm an American, and an American of various ethnic background, largely Scandinavian, Viking in origin, but I am an American, and I'm proud of that. Also a retired Army officer. I'm proud of having served my country and the world and the greater good as a soldier, and I identify as that. So we all identify. But the problem is that when you use your identity to exclude others, to avoid being with others, simply on the basis of identity, then you've fallen into or drifted into the wrong, and that's morally wrong. That's things people shouldn't be doing. Really should not be um, dividing people and avoiding people based on that. Well, that doesn't mean you have to get along and participate with everything everybody does. I mean, I am not going to eat bushmeat. People in West Africa and Central Africa love bushmeat. That ain't going to happen. People eat goat. I'm not eating goat. It just ain't going to happen. I don't like goat. And I'm sorry, South Africa, but I don't care for pop. Don't care. I find it to be quite bland. I will say it's better than fufu that you get from Nigeria. They're not the same thing, but they're both pasty foods, both pasty starches, and I don't care for it. Pop, of course, coming from maize, and fufu coming from not yams. What's the other one? I can't think of it. But anyway, yeah. So you don't have to adopt everyone's beliefs, but when you divide people or deny people based on artificialities or even based on their cultural practices, that puts you at risk of being wrong. Let's see what else we got here. Pass. Okay, just to go, you did not study female studies. That's why it helped. Oh, okay. You're saying I didn't study female studies. It's interesting because most people, people look at you and we go, okay, so this comes back to discrimination. When you see someone, whether you intend to or not, it's natural for humans to form a mental picture in their mind and reach certain conclusions about somebody. It's hard not to do that. So we shouldn't fault people for doing that. If people act on that without getting the truth or learning about someone, then you can fault them. But simply reaching a conclusion without knowing something. So a lot of people look at me and they look, oh, some rich white guy, and he's probably a misogynist and he's a homophobe and yada, 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 yada. People make all these assumptions, but that's just based on my physical appearance. They know nothing about me. Don't know my views about this, that, the other. It's similar to, for instance, I believe in our constitutional right to keep and bear arms here in America. So a lot of people assume that I have a house full of guns. I don't, but I have a right to. And it's a right that I defended by serving in uniform. So the presumptions that people make about others based on appearance or identity really can be corrosive. One of the things I've done is I've not called my channel something that I thought about calling it because I figured it would come in for a lot of commentary. But my war college students a couple of years ago started calling me. Now, you have to understand that every time we talk about something that was strategic, whether it was economics or politics or culture, religion, military security, nuclear forces, energy, whatever it was, I always could find something in Africa to use as an example to explain, to help clarify it. So I told so many stories about Africa all over the continent to my students that my students in the Army War College started calling me Chris Africanus, which is Latin of Chris of Africa. And I considered strongly calling my channel Chris Africanus, but I didn't because I figured people look at that. And so you get some people who are black who would come to my channel and go, oh, we're going to find this guy that's black. And they'd see some white guy and go, I'm not interested. And you'd find a lot of white people who wouldn't bother to read the channel because, oh, it's about Africa. What do I know about that? What do I care about it? So I didn't do that. I just left my name on there and we'll see who shows up at the channel. But people form opinions. Now, to let you know, part of the reason why I've grown this beard, other than the fact that I was just trying something different now that I'm retired and I can actually do this, is that I knew that I would be participating in this Center for International and Strategic Center for Strategic International Studies, CSIS, debate, which is taking place tomorrow. It was supposed to take place last week in Minneapolis, but the COVID-19 stopped that. So tomorrow, live on the CSIS website at 10 o'clock Eastern U.S. time, 4 p.m., 1600 in South Africa, I will be a debate participant with the CSIS debate, talking about counterterrorism and human rights. Now, when I was going to physically be present, I was going to have this long hair and this beard intentionally to subvert expectations. Because now they're telling people what a role was. But when I first understood, I agreed to do this, I was told that they didn't tell the audience your background, so they didn't know where you're coming from. So rather than knowing who you were in your personal history, you were just simply someone that was up on the stage debating a pro and con for a position. So that was what I was trying. Is Just a Ghost leaving? So I was just going to be on stage debating this. And so when I argued issues about human rights and counterterrorism, I didn't want people to see someone with, smooth, short haircut, clean shaven, and obviously a former military officer. I wanted someone to listen to my ideas and judge them on their merit. So it was an intentional effort on my part to subvert expectations. But now it's become my COVID-19 beard, and I don't know when I'm going to shave it off. As of right now, the county that I live in has been extended to May 28th. May 28th. Less than 600 confirmed cases of the coronavirus in this county with less than 10 deaths. 8 deaths after 6 weeks of lockdown in a county approaching 500,000 people. and we have been extended for 28 days. There are a lot of very angry people here, folks, very angry people here on all sides of the political aisle, left, right, and in the center, who are angry with the state for its lack of transparency and explaining why two-thirds of the state must remain on lockdown when much of that area has very few cases of COVID-19 after 6 weeks. The incubation period is not 6 weeks for this disease, ladies and gentlemen. It is less than 2 weeks. So we should be seeing some improvement here. And we're wondering why we are still stuck. So Christoph says, I'm preaching to the choir. Yeah, not my intent. I didn't mean to preach, just meant to share. So let me bring this back again to talk about this, folks. The Chronicles of Chris Africanus. Christoph, I love it. Maybe I should do that. So Coolio, I'm sorry, I'm going to shrink myself back down here because I want to bring in this thing from earlier. I want to bring this topic up again, remind folks that, so for those who don't know, I had come in contact with this up and coming South African, actually Namibian musician. Her name is Giselle. She had a music video about 3 years ago called Soedwes. It's an Afrikaans song about Namibia. And it was a beautiful song. I didn't know about it until recently. I found out about it. I went and found her Facebook page, contacted her manager. Next thing you know, we're in touch about a lot of things. He's going to eventually appear on my program. But I didn't want to bring him in when I had 3 followers. I wanted to get some subscribers that actually made it worth his time to come on here and talk about Afrikaans music, the music industry and such in South Africa, how that all works and doesn't work. So Giselle's manager is going to come on the program eventually, but he contacted me yesterday and asked me if I would be interested in live streaming her launch. Now, she has an album. After 3 years, they're about ready to release the album. It's coming out, and this coming Friday, Giselle will be live 7 p.m. Johannesburg time, 1 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States, premiering her new album, debuting it, live streaming, and it will be on my channel. At least that's the plan. If it doesn't happen, I'll let you know, but I'm going to put some promos up on it to let you know about Giselle. And there's a screen capture of her Facebook page. You can go check her out. Go to YouTube and type in Soedwes, and you will find her, or type in Giselle and put Namibia or South Africa, and you can listen to her music. Anyway, so she will be debuting live streaming on my channel, and I won't be commenting. There's no copyright stuff here because they're not protecting it. Now, what her manager has done is they've set up a studio for her that's actually quite professional, from what I understand, and it's not going to be simply her sitting there stroking a guitar, singing a song. It's going to be very well produced. And so I'm looking very much forward to that. Most people who follow my channel are unfamiliar with her as well, and the first time they heard of her is when I mentioned to her. So if you want to get on the ground floor of an exciting new artist from Namibia who sings in Afrikaans and in English, this Friday on my stream, pay attention for that. And if I am unable to get the stream, I'll make sure that I put a note up so that people know where to find it. But the plan is it will be on my stream Friday, and I'm hoping that we get a lot of people tuned in. She was supposed to come to the United States as part of her launch to perform in Dallas, New York City, and somewhere else on the East Coast. And that was canceled because of the COVID-19 crisis. So they're going ahead with the album launch, or CD, whatever it is these days, going ahead with the launch. And her manager had contacted me and asked me if I would be willing to put her on my stream. Yes, absolutely. Should be fascinating. Anyway, so what else we got over here? So Christoph says, remember your sunglasses and robe and take the appearance of the dude. Oh, Coolio will definitely be tuning in. Okay. So Coolio, you never did say where you're from. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I was curious, are you from KZN? It sounded like you might be from that part of the country. So that would be Friday and should be interesting. So what else can we talk about here that might interest folks? Oh, here's a development that affects South Africa, and this is from Uganda. I did this on my podcast last night, but a company in Uganda has now been certified by the South African health authorities to export antiretrovirals to South Africa. So there's a pharmaceutical company now in Uganda that will be exporting antiretrovirals to South Africa. Now, that company is also working on getting certified to produce hydrochloroquine, the anti-malarial drug, which is being promoted by a number of health authorities and Donald Trump as a potential mitigation strategy for early stages of COVID-19 infection. It's proven some degree of efficacy, but of course, because Donald Trump mentioned it, it must be an evil that the media must stamp out and prevent us from knowing about. and tell us all sorts of lies about its use. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, having lived in Africa over 3 decades, I have taken hydrochloroquine and generic versions of it for many, many years without any ill effects. It's not affected me, and it's prevented me from getting malaria. So I have no issues with it. But a company called Quality Chemicals Limited, CIPLA, which is located in Luzira in Uganda, not too far from Kampala, if I'm not mistaken, was now certified to ship antiretrovirals to South Africa. So this is part of their Africa for Africa campaign to provide pharmaceuticals to Africa. Interestingly enough, they also export drugs and antiretrovirals to Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Angola, Zambia, and Botswana. So much of Southern Africa is already getting antiretrovirals from this Ugandan company. Now, there you go. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which was recently negotiated and is now in effect, this would be a great opportunity to take advantage of the lowering of trade barriers intra-Africa. Intra-Africa trade is abysmally low. It's the lowest intercontinental trade of any continent on the planet. Countries in Africa trading with each other. This is in part a legacy of the colonial era in which countries made goods and services or took raw materials and shipped it out of the colonies to the metropolitan for the benefit of the colonial power. And those patterns of trade exist to this day in some respects for some countries. Now, there's other trade patterns, China, the United States, and others, but colonies, now countries in Africa trading with each other has not been the norm, in part because in many places in Africa, colonies produce, or countries produce the exact same goods from one country to the next. Ghana is not going to have much success exporting cocoa to Cote d'Ivoire because it's the world's largest producer of cocoa. By contrast, Uganda is going to have very little success shipping coffee to Ethiopia because Ethiopia is a major coffee producer. You get the point I'm getting at here. So when you have similar products and there's no differentiation between neighboring states, neighboring countries, it's difficult to develop trade. Not impossible, but difficult. So what else we got here? So, okay, coolio. I'm curious, Chris, why was there much more of a German influence in Namibia than in the northern parts of South Africa? Okay, well, that's actually a good question. So the deal was this, is that Germans first began arriving in what is today Namibia, but was known as Südwestafrika, or Deutsche Südwestafrika. They first began arriving there in the early parts of the 19th century as missionaries. The Rhenish Missionary Society in Germany started sending Christian missionaries to that part of Africa, which had been largely neglected by others at this point. And so they were the first to come. But then there was a German businessman, Peters, I'm trying to remember his name now, it was Karl Peters, who tried to get the German government to turn Southwest Africa into a German colony. But the German government at that stage was not interested in colonies and certainly not interested in Africa. But with the advent of the Berlin Conference in 1885, the German Kaiser and the German government's chancellor's position on this changed. And so for the scramble for Africa that took place in the late 19th century, the German government declared Deutsche Südwestafrika a protectorate. And with that came large-scale German colonization. The climate was conducive, although it's warm in Namibia, it was conducive to colonization. Unlike West Africa, where malaria and other tropical diseases wiped out Europeans in large numbers, ethnic Germans from government officials, military, and others could migrate to what became Namibia and settle there. And they started coming in larger numbers in the end of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century, particularly after the Herero War and the Ovambo Wars that took place in 1903 to 1905, in which there was a genocidal campaign carried out against the Herero people who had risen up after seeing German farmers settle more and more land and trade or sell or have their land taken from them, become angry with the arrival of the Europeans and decided to stop it by attacking German farmsteads. Something like 342 German men, women, and children were murdered on farms. And as a consequence, the German Schutztruppe, the colonial forces, marched out under von Trotha, who was the general who was down there, and they went out with their forces, reinforced by German troops sent to Africa, and they pushed the Herero people back into the Omaheke Desert on the border with today's Botswana. And then they poisoned wells, and when they captured the Herero, they shot them on sight, executed them, and many fled to Botswana, to the Maun area of the Okavango Delta. And so today you have a population of Herero who live in Botswana and have been there for about a century, or over a century. In Namibia itself, the Herero were one of the largest ethnic groups, but today they're a relatively small group, only about 7% of the population, I believe it is. They're not even close to being one of the larger groups as a consequence of this genocide. Somewhere around 75,000 or more Herero died in this conflict. Anyway, so large numbers of Germans came, especially after that. So from about 1905 to 1915, 1914, 1915, with the advent of the First World War, thousands of Germans migrated to German Southwest Africa and settled there. Now, after the South Africans arrived there and as part of the Commonwealth to defeat the Germans in the First World War, battles took place in 1915. Um, the German colonial control ended, and the South Africans took over colonial administration of Southwest Africa. Many of the ethnic Germans were deported. There was something in the order of about 15,000 ethnic Germans, and about 6 or 7,000 at least, or 8,000 were deported back to Germany. Now, a lot of those were government officials or members of the Schutztruppe, and so as representatives of the government, they were sent back. But also some private citizens were also kicked out of the country. That left a small German population, but a significant one in that they were established or getting established. That German population continued and increased naturally, but not a significant amount until the Second World War. After the end of the Second World War, former German soldiers and people who disillusioned with German society in small numbers began to migrate to German, well, now Southwest Africa, and settle there. So that eventually they became about half of the white European population thereabouts. But today, the number of ethnic Germans that are in Namibia is probably somewhere around 35 or 40,000, perhaps, maybe a few more. Those who have German ancestry, it's more than that because they tend to mix with Afrikaans speaking families and have German ancestry. But the reason that you have Germans and such a large German influence in the business community and in government in Southwest Africa or Namibia today is because of this German period, which started with Christian missionaries influencing the events there, and then a German businessman trying to get it to become a colony, then the colonization, a very brief period of colonization by the Germans, but that ethnic element stayed. The Germans always, the reason that they retain their German language and are so influential today, as opposed to South Africa, there's a lot of Germans in South Africa, probably somewhere between 400 and 600,000 people who are ethnic Germans in South Africa today, who still speak German to some degree, many as a first language. But the reason that it stayed so strong, the influence in Namibia, is because that German population was always reticent to assimilate with the Afrikaans community, which came later. There were some Afrikaners there early on, but numbers came after South Africa took over the country. So they're reticent. I remember there's a restaurant that's in Windhoek that I go to that's populated or is patronized primarily by white Namibians, German and Afrikaans speakers, and you can go there and you listen to the Afrikaners complain about the Germans and how snooty they are, and listen to the Germans talk about what ignorant farmers the Afrikaners are. And of course, many of the Germans saying ignorant farmers, they're also farmers. So it's just kind of funny. And then, of course, you talk to them and find out that, well, my son, who's German, married the Afrikaans girl from down the road. And anyway, so it's, yeah, that's the reason why you see such a strong German influence. Now, there's also been a historical role from the government of Germany trying to build a relationship with modern Namibia since 1989. And so that has played a role. Interestingly enough, the only place in the world before the Germans went to Afghanistan under NATO that you found German military troops outside of Germany was in Namibia. And that was because, sounds like someone's on a motorcycle in my neighborhood, but that was because the Germans sent a military training team to Namibia to help the government of SWAPO train its military. So they have a security cooperation team that works out of the German embassy there with the Namibian military. Fascinating. You don't find that elsewhere. So that was a really interesting development. I've actually met some of those folks when I've been in Namibia on official business in the diplomatic capacity, the Germans, that is, and a good bunch of folks there. So anyway. So I hope, Coolio, that answers your question. The northern parts of South Africa, you don't see too many. You see white Afrikaans speakers, and of course, a lot of coloreds in that area. The coloreds, of course, trying to get away from white Afrikaans rule or white Boer rule, Dutch rule, and then later from English kept spreading. And you have all kinds of divisions within the colored community. You have the Griquas, you have the Orlums, you have, list goes on. You have the Rehoboth Basters, who are a group that were originally originated in South Africa as a mixing of Europeans and Khoi and San and Malays. And they, under Jonker Afrikaner and others, moved up into Namibia. And you had Rehoboth established by the colored community, and it still existed today, about 35 to 50,000 coloreds living there who are from that group. Now, of course, those of you who speak Bastos knows that Bastos means bastard in English. That's probably not the best appellation for a group, but nonetheless, it's a term of pride. They take that as pride, being called Basters, and that's how they identify it, as the Rehoboth Basters. Interesting bit of history there. Anyway, yeah, so that's why I probably didn't see many Germans going up that way. The land is not all that productive from a farming standpoint when you get in the Northern Cape. And so a lot of the ethnic Germans were either in the trades or those interested in agriculture wound up in other parts of the country, like the Free State, the Transvaal, now in Mpumalanga, and places like that, or KwaZulu-Natal. And of course, they assimilated Germans. One thing about Germans, like the Irish, wherever they go, they do tend to assimilate and adopt the language of the country they go to. And in this case, it wound up being Afrikaans for the most part. You had very few ethnic Germans who assimilated in South African society and became English speakers. They became Afrikaans speakers. Let's see what else. The dude, amazing. You have so much historical information. I feel so bad. I mean, I'm South African and you know far more about my history than I do. Well, don't feel bad, Coolio. I am a historian, so I should know about history. But yeah, it's South Africa's history is fascinating, and it's often been misleading depending on who's in charge. So when the National Party was in charge, the history of South Africa was painted accurately, but from a one-sided perspective. You know, I mean, the South African government rarely emphasized the fact that Boers allied with Black African tribes to defeat the Ndebele, for instance. But that is part of South Africa's history. So as a historian, I believe it's my responsibility to know the facts and investigate them and learn about it. And so it's interesting. When I started learning Afrikaans back in the 1980s, a lot of people turned to me and said, "What are you, a racist?" I said, "What do you mean?" Well, I mean, that's the language of apartheid. That's the language, that's the white racists who oppress Black Africans. I'm like, okay, well, stop. First off, if that's what you believe, then you don't have all the information. For starters, the majority of people who speak Afrikaans as a first language aren't even white. They're mixed race colored. There's more mixed race colors. At this time, there were about 5 to 6 million coloreds speaking Afrikaans, and about 2.6, 2.8 million white South Africans whose first language is Afrikaans. So first off, it's not a white language. It may have origins from a European language, but it is now an African language in many respects, in all respects. So I said, first off, you're wrong about that. So my learning Afrikaans could entirely be to become more familiar with the colored community in South Africa. Why do you assume it's not? I said, that's the first problem. The second problem is that when I learned my second language, which was German, of course, as an English speaker, the first language I learned after that was German. When I learned my second language, German, I discovered something about languages. And that is that languages tell you a lot about the culture and the identity of a people who speak the language. For instance, the way the language is formed, the way it's structured, tells you a lot about how they think. And at the time in the 1980s, I was trying to understand what was going on with the National Party, the Afrikaans-speaking community in South Africa, both colors and white South Africans. And I wanted to understand things better. And I wanted to understand the mindset of the Afrikaners. And to me, it seemed like a highly appropriate idea to learn a foreign language, like Afrikaans, so that I would get better insight into why people think and behave the way they do. Now, that sounds like a simplistic explanation, but trust me, there's a lot of truth to it. When I learned German, for instance, in English, when you want to insult someone, you use foul language like the F word and, things like that. In German, you don't use those words. In German, what you do is the worst insult is to call someone a donkey. If I were to call someone an Esel, which is donkey in German, that is a fighting offense. That's the highest insult you can pay someone or give to someone. So learning things about that and then learning the colloquialisms about how people use language really makes a big difference. So I started learning Afrikaans to learn about that community, and it made a big difference. It's, for me, being a historian and political scientist is not simply learning about events and places and people, but it's also trying to get into the psyche and mindset of a people, of a nation, of a culture. Now, can you do that 100%? No. No, I mean, no one ever can unless you're part of that culture or you grow up around it or you live it for a period of time. But even not living amongst people, you can understand who they are and how they operate and why they behave the way they do in large measure, which can make a big difference. So that's always been part of my philosophy. I look at a holistic approach to things, the same way I did intelligence work and things from a security perspective. I mean, when I was talking earlier on this stream about electricity being a strategic issue for Botswana, I'm serious about that. How many people will talk about electricity who are national political leaders or even business people, now some business people, and say, now this isn't fair in Southern African context because you all know about the disaster that is Eskom. But in much of the world where people have reliable electricity, you don't have this conversation, but it's a conversation that must be had. We finally started having this conversation about electricity in the United States about 20 years ago after 9/11, when people said, oh, our electricity grid is controlled by the internet and it's vulnerable to hacking and people can shut down grids and cause chaos. Yes, they could. And so cybersecurity, when it comes to our electrical network, is a critical strategic issue. But it wasn't something people were paying attention to. My point is that I look at things holistically. Does that mean I'm right all the time? No. Does it mean that I've got the right approach? Maybe, maybe not. but it's the way that I approach things. So let's see what else we got over here. The Sperrgebiet, yep, it means prohibited area, also known as a diamond area. It's a diamond mining area in southwest Namibia in the Namibia Desert. Absolutely. And the Sperrgebiet exists because the Orange River carried diamonds that came up out of the diamond pipes in the Free State area, and they were washed over millennia or hundreds of thousands of years down the Orange River, keep tumbling down, carried by the current, and the floods would take the diamonds, and they would wash out into the Atlantic Ocean. And the Benguela Current would come up from the south, from the Antarctic South, and would carry the currents and wash them up on the beaches of Namibia. And this is a Sperrgebiet. And this was the Sperrgebiet when the Germans were there. They already knew there were diamonds there back then. And so you literally could walk on the beach and find diamonds. True story. Now, it's less likely today because they've been combing and mining those beaches for over a century now. But a century ago, anyone could walk along the beach and just go, whoo, diamonds. And that's why it became the Sperrgebiet, the forbidden zone in Namibia or German Southwest Africa, so that it could not, people couldn't simply just walk out and pick up diamonds. So there you go. The Sperrgebiet renamed yeah, okay, good luck with that pronunciation. National Park extends to around 100 kilometers inland, and its total area is 20. Yep, it is big. Makes up 3% of Namibia's landmass. However, mining only takes place in 5%, with most of the area acting as buffer zone. Absolutely correct. Saw a very famous movie. Well, I don't know if it's famous, but a movie when I was a kid about the Sperrgebiet and an aircraft that crashed there. It wasn't identified as that, but it was clear that it was that. And the people who were trying to survive in the Namib Desert, good luck with that. And then, of course, they were eventually arrested and detained because they were in prohibited diamond area. They were just trying to survive. Christoph says members of the public are banned from entering most of the area despite the creation of the national park. Absolutely true. He also says he has a childhood friend who got a family member that owns a farm up there and worked for someone of English background in the past few years that also have a large family farm there. Yep. Coolio, can you talk Afrikaans? Ik praat nie Afrikaans nie. I can speak it, but my pronunciation is not the best. Whereas in German, I'm often mistaken for being an ethnic German by Germans. That's a high compliment. And I speak French fluently. I'm not mistaken for a Frenchman, but I am often complimented on my French accent by others. But my Afrikaans accent is not particularly good. I can read Afrikaans and I can understand it. And I listen to Afrikaans music, hence my interest in Giselle, among others. But I'm a huge Snotkop fan. Those who know Snotkop, Franjo du Plessis, Kurt Darren, love Kurt Darren, and Rika Snell, a whole host of Afrikaans musicians. Music is a great way to learn a language because you're curious about the lyrics, so you look it up and you get a feel for colloquialism, stuff like that. So I can understand Afrikaans when people talk to me, and I can understand much of what I read. The thing about Afrikaans is if you speak German fluently and you speak English fluently, Afrikaans, because of its Dutch origins, is somewhere in between there, and you find a lot of vocabulary that if it's not English, it's close to German. And so like Fanand, that's this evening. Abend is German for evening. It's very close. You can pick it up. Donnerstag, and then Donnerstag in German. So I have to be careful though because I've been pointed out that my pronunciation of the G at the end in Afrikaans is wrong, and it is because in German when a G comes at the end of the word, it's pronounced like a T. Like a T. So anyway, or a G. Anyway, so it's a little bit different. So my Afrikaans, spoken Afrikaans is not that good. But of course, when I'm in South Africa or Mozambique or somewhere like that, I'm often mistaken for being Afrikaner. I remember in Mozambique, in Maputo, the police were trying to shake me down for a bribe, and they demanded that I pay because I had South African hire. The car was a rental from South Africa that I picked up at OR Tambo. So I was in Mozambique, and they wanted me to pay a bribe, and I said, I'm not paying you a bribe. And then they said, well, you're from South Africa. I said, no, I'm an American. No, you're not. You're an Afrikaner. I said, no, I'm an American. I'm speaking English to you. No, but you're South African. I said, but you have my passport. It says, a diplomatic passport. It says United States of America. Here's my military ID. I'm in the army. I'm an American. Ek praat nie Afrikaans nie. See, you are an Afrikaner. Long story short, I didn't pay the bribe. I spent 45 minutes them trying to shake me down. Eventually, this is like on a Friday night, I'd gone to a little South African-owned restaurant, bar that was close by. No drinking, just dinner. It was very good food. And I was headed back to my hotel, and they were trying to shake me down for money. And I said, well, we'll call the American Embassy. No, the American Embassy is closed. I said, well, there's a Marine on duty after 45 minutes. And of course, this took so long because their English was pathetic. My Portuguese was non-existent, and their Afrikaans was only as good as going, aha, you're an Afrikaner. See, we knew. Anyway, so people are writing Afrikaans since I said au plaisir. Okay. Thank you for supplying information, Krista. Oh, Ecuador, dit by. Okay. Any angenehm, he is Afrikaans. Okay. Well, now we switched all over to Afrikaans. Well, thanks, guys. Ja, ek is Afrikaans. Ek is Amerikaan. Ek is in Soetie, so aski ek nie altyd sin maak nie. Okay. Nie dit was vir Chris. All right, cool. Well, thank you, Coolio. Those are nice words. We're in South Africa. Oh, you're asking Christoph where he's from. Oh, yeah. And Coolio, you said you were from the Western Cape. Awesome part of the country. I love Franschhoek. Hermanus is nice, although I don't really love it as much as others do. But I like Paarl and I love Stellenbosch. And of course, parts of Cape Town are just amazing. Simonstown's not too bad. Let's see. Yeah, Christoph has been all over the place. So I have to be careful. You call me out, try to point out if I'm wrong about something. So, Potchefstroom, Klerksdorp, Paarl, Stellenbosch, Gordons Bay, Graaff-Reinet, yeah. Yep. Paulie, hey, you've made it. Good to see you here. Glad you made it. Yeah, we've been chatting about a number of things today. You see the screen capture there of Giselle. I'm just going to share this with Paulie, folks. They're already here. This Friday, it looks like I'll be having Giselle's album debut. Her live concert from Pretoria will be streamed on my channel. That's the plan right now. I'm working with her manager to stream it on my channel Friday, 7 p.m. Johannesburg time, 1 p.m. my time here in the U.S. and the East Coast. By the way, folks, I haven't been begging for likes. I have no idea because I don't have that window open. If you're enjoying the chat, please give me a like. And I think almost everybody that's here is subscribed to it. But if anyone's here is not subscribed to the channel and you're enjoying the conversation, the content on this Stray Voltage, my impromptu chat on a Sunday, just kicking back, talking about issues. But if you're not subscribed to the channel, please push that button right down there and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the content. And be sure to toggle the little button so that you get notifications whenever I go live or I do a video and post it, or I premiere a video. So please do that. Oh, by the way, for folks, some people didn't realize this. I didn't either. When you see premiere on YouTube, that means it can be for, I guess it could be done for live stream, but I haven't seen it. But it's normally a pre-recorded video that is set kind of like television. Okay, tonight on SABC at 7 p.m., you'll see a premiere. So it's a premiere for a new content. And so I've started using the premiere, but when I first started using it about 2 weeks ago, I didn't understand that the chat window is open unless you disable it. So I don't disable a chat window because if people want to say something, they should feel free to say something. And this is interactive. What's the point of going on YouTube if you can't communicate with the person sharing with you? So I left the chat. I didn't close it down, and I didn't know that people were coming on. So after I premiered several videos, I just happened to go in one time when I had a rather long one just to see if it was playing. And there were like 5 or 6 of you all in there and commenting and saying hello and asking questions, saying hi to me. And I felt really guilty that I hadn't been there. So now whenever I premiere a video, I'm trying to do it at a time that I can make sure that I'm present. So if you see a premiere from me, it means a pre-recorded video on a topic and one that I've done research on. I've done some analysis, and that's why I'm commenting. And so I'll premiere the video, and the chat window will be open, and I will be there live normally to answer chat questions, to elaborate or enumerate on the content that is coming over the video. So that's what's going on when you see a premiere. Anyway, Ronaldo host did a premiere this morning on a pre-recorded video, same sort of thing. I think there's a lot of confusion among YouTube users about how the premiere works. I don't know if it's relatively new or people just didn't know about it. I didn't know about it, and I found out about it serendipitously. So that's what I'm doing with those, and that's how I'm working it. So anyway, just so you understand that. Let me see what else I missed while I'm chatting here. Free State. Teeny's in Free State. Okay. Cool. Is most of your audience from South Africa? No, it's not actually. Although I'd say about at this point, because of people learning about me on Ronaldo's program, the percentage of South African viewers has actually grown significantly. But not just because of that. Also, I've been other places and people have seen me from LinkedIn. I'd say about 40% of my audience is South Africa based, it looks like at this point, which is fine. I do a lot of coverage of South Africa, but I also cover all of Africa and I talk about other issues. I haven't used the channel yet to talk about politics. I had kind of envisioned doing a radio program on a political one after my end of my active service, but I haven't really done that. I'm really trying to get American business to get involved in Africa for the mutual benefit of Africans and Americans, because I'm concerned that by the year 2050, if America continues to ignore, the American business sector continues to ignore Africa, that we'll be a second-rate global power, and we shouldn't be. America has amazing idea. American exceptionalism is genuine, and I'm not sitting here saying we're the best country in the world. But what I'm saying is that America's unique experiment in the human experience, and it should continue. It should be a powerful nation, in my view, for good. Not always, it doesn't always do good, but it should be. And we won't be if we're not economically strong. If we ignore Africa out to 2050, we won't be strong. 2.6 billion people, over a billion consumers, which would be over 3 times the current size of the entire US population. Missing out on that market and not having a long track record there will be detrimental to the economic and national security of the United States. See, I look to 2050 and beyond, not the next election cycle, but then I'm not running for office. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from there. Yeah, but my audience is a lot more from South Africa, and I'm very grateful people are on there. So that's one of the reasons why I've been spending a fair amount of time doing South Africa videos. Also, you have a press, and there is news reporting. Much of it is objective, not all of it is, but I can actually get information on South Africa without having sitting in South Africa and follow events in South Africa. Plus, I know South Africa very well. At least I like to think so. I think you guys would agree that I'm pretty darn familiar with South Africa. So let's see. Do you ever go on Reddit? I'm sure the subreddit for South Africa. No, I've not seen that, Coolio. I know Reddit. It's not something I've really messed around with. The Afrikaans was a test for you. Yeah, I got that. All over the Adirondacks. Well, the Adirondacks would be in New York. That's where we call the part of the Appalachians known as the Adirondacks is in New York for the most part. Also New England, but here in Pennsylvania we don't call it that. It's just called the Appalachians. There's other parts of the Appalachian chain that have different names. But yeah, that's beautiful. Upstate New York is stunning. You get up the Hudson Valley where the Adirondacks run into that. Lake Placid, that area is just absolutely gorgeous. All right, Paulie, back on duty today, so home late. Well done on the impromptu with Roman last night. It was a quality history lesson regarding MK. Yeah, I subscribed to his channel actually, Paulie, and I just realized there was another feature on YouTube that I can put channels that interest me on the side of my channel page, and I started doing that. So Ronaldo's at the top. Morning Shot is on there, Germ Warfare, World Rugby, the Super Rugby, the Major League Rugby here in the U.S., all YouTube channels that I'd like people to watch. I've kind of put them on there for recommended. What's thought-provoking, Coolio? Yeah, thank you for the comments there, Paulie, on the Roman last night. Also, thanks for asking to give me a call. It was getting a little difficult to try to type and make some points here. I wasn't trying to correct Roman and say you're wrong, but he had thrown the Botswana Democratic Party and its governance in with the discussion of liberation movements, and I just want to make that distinction that there was no liberation struggle in Botswana. It wasn't necessary, and that's one of the reasons why it's had a stable system of governance. So I just want to make sure that was clear to folks. And then the next thing I know, I called in and we're talking. So I enjoyed it. Roman seemed to. I sent him an email yesterday, and hopefully we'll get in touch and maybe talk about some other things. But yeah, but folks, my number of subscribers is relatively low. Just so that people know a little more background about me, since we've got some people tuned in here that probably don't know the full story. So I'm a retired Army colonel from the U.S. Army, and I retired in October of 2019 after 36 and a half years of service, 34 and a half of that on active service. 2 years I was in the reserve component of the National Guard. Oh, yeah, Morning Shot is thought. Yeah, he is. Okay. Yeah, so 36 and a half years service, 34 of those on active duty, enlisted as an enlisted soldier in the Signal Corps, and then as an intelligence officer when I became an officer. And I served in tactical, in strategic, in signals, and counterintelligence roles throughout that career. I was fortunate enough to, as an intelligence officer, to write for the President of the United States. So the thing that you heard about after 9/11, the Presidential Daily Brief, or the PDB, I'm actually an author of that. I've done it 9 times, which is an astounding number of times for an intelligence analyst. I'm also a regional specialist for Africa, a foreign area officer, as we call it, for Africa. And as a consequence, I'm responsible for being a subject matter expert on sub-Saharan Africa, hence my interest in Africa. But my interest in Africa is driven not by that, but by the fact that I had an interest in Africa. And so I made sure that I went back in the Army and worked my way into that role because it's something I want to do. So in Africa, I've lived in Tunisia, Liberia, Botswana, Malawi, Niger, Mauritania, Uganda, and Ethiopia. So all over the continent. And I've also been on short-term work in probably about 30 more countries in Africa. So I've been to much of the continent. The one exception being right in the center, the Congo, the DRC, never been, not in a hurry to get there. Anyway, so I've worked development, HIV, tuberculosis, malaria programs across the continent, development, built schools, clinics, things like that, HIV, voluntary counseling testing centers, strategic communications, public relations, peacekeeping training, counterterrorism operations, security sector reform, defense. Chris White, one day when you get 1,000 subs, I'll take royalties and earn promotion fees. Maybe, Paulie. Those are all things that I participate in. I've taught at the undergraduate level at Iowa State University. I've taught at the postgraduate level at the Army War College. I worked with the National Security Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the U.S. Africa Command. Yeah, so I've done a fair number of things in uniform, and a lot of things are very different than many others. I have a wide variety of interests. So I've long had an interest in epidemiology and virology. So things like Ebola, hantavirus, SARS, MERS, things like that, COVID-19. These are all things that I already have an interest in and have long had an interest in, and no more than the average bear about those sorts of things. And because I take a holistic approach when it comes to intelligence, I've always torn things apart at every angle. So that includes economics. So I did a master's program in international development studies, and that included international political economy, community and regional planning, and cultural anthropology. So those are three areas that you find very few military officers with an experience in. And I did that because it interested me and I felt that it would serve me well. And it has. My understanding of how population growth occurs and doesn't occur, the environment, how communities are designed and built. So I can look at Alexandria and just shake my head going, I know how this happened and how it shouldn't be perpetuated in the future. I have some background, all those things. So it's a very eclectic and different sort of background than you find with a lot of folks. I'm not boasting. You know, if folks want to leave the conversation because they think I have an ego, feel free. That's not it. I'm just, for those who are not familiar with me, I'm just giving a little background insight into who I am and where I come from. I also lived in poverty as a kid. When I applied to go to university, I did not have the $25 application fee to apply to Ohio University. My high school guidance counselor called the university admissions office and told them that I was indigent and poor and didn't have the $25. Would they be willing to waive the application fee? They did. And so I applied to Ohio University and got accepted based on my academic performance, which wasn't great, but it was good enough to enter university. And that's how I got to university, along with federal, state grants, loans, and working my way through school. And then went in the Army and got a bonus for education, which I used to complete my degree when I went back to school. So that's a little bit about me. Of course, I've served in peacekeeping and combat in the Balkans, in Southwest Asia, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Yugoslavia, in Kosovo, Bosnia, Croatia, those sorts of things. And then lots of tours of duty and 3 tours in Germany, 1 in Italy. So of my 36 years, 23 I've spent overseas. So it's been an interesting experience for me. And I bring all of these things to my conversations and my discussions on topics about Africa, but about the world in general. So doesn't make me right, doesn't make me wrong. It is an informed opinion, I like to think, on most topics, not simply someone just shooting lightning out of their bottom. So although my stream is called Stray Voltage, so you could accuse me of that. Let's see. Can I still be called to active duty? Yes, actually I can. So the way it works in the U.S. military is that when you retire, you have to request retirement. So I always knew this, but I didn't know you had to request it when you reach the mandatory date. So we have mandatory retirement based on rank. If you don't make a certain rank, you must get out at a certain point. And sometimes you don't reach retirement age, so you don't get a retirement check. So you have to get promoted, but as an officer and as an enlisted person. So you can reach a mandatory rank or age limit for rank, a mandatory service limit for rank, or a mandatory service limit for age, or a mandatory service limit for combined service. Your enlisted service doesn't count, so that's why I had over 30 years. But as an officer, you can only serve 30 years. As an enlisted, you can only serve 30 years, assuming you get promoted and work your way up the chain. As a full colonel, you can stay till 30 years, and that was the case for me. I was a full colonel, so I got 30 years service as an officer, plus 4+ years as an enlisted soldier, and my reserve time comes to 36.5 years. Now, when you retire, I thought if you were forced to retire by a mandatory maximum, which in my case was 30 years of service as an officer, you just retire. Well, about a year out, I was sent an email and said, did you submit your request to retire? And I wrote back and said, request to retire? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? And they're like, no, you have to request retirement. You don't simply retire. If you don't request retirement, your retirement check's not going to start and your paycheck will stop. You can show up for work, but you can't work here. So I requested my retirement, and then they have to approve your retirement. And so what happens, they don't disapprove it unless you're a general that they want to keep on and extend your service. Now, generals can go up to 40 years with congressional approval, but everyone is on an individual basis. So most of our 4-star generals or three-star generals are over 30 years of service, and they are on service by the consent of Congress. The president has to submit their name. Can General so-and-so continue for 3 more years? And they allow them to continue. But as a colonel, I had to retire at 30 years. So I submitted my letter, and then a year later, I retired on October 30, September. So October 1st, I was retired. But you are transferred to the reserve component, and you can be recalled to active duty at any time. Now, because of my unique skill set, it's not impossible that I might be called back to active duty. I've actually seen people called in my career. When I first came in as a lieutenant, I saw a warrant officer who was like 68 years old who was ordered back to active duty because he was the only officer in the entire U.S. Army who had any experience with unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, or drones, as people like to call them today. So in 1989, this guy was called back at the age of 68 to work on a drone program in the early days of us having drones. So it was fascinating. And then, of course, in the Gulf War, a couple years after, I saw a number of reservists who were retired 10, 15 years or longer called back because they had unique skill sets and they were used in units in Germany or in Southwest Asia. So I could be called back. It's unlikely, but I could be called back. But in the meantime, I'm on the retired role. So I'm still an officer and I still have to behave myself. But I do get back many of the freedoms that I surrendered as a commissioned officer. What I mean by that is that you can't have members of the military, officers running around saying things that are bad about the president, the cabinet, and things like that. So we have constraints on our freedom of speech. Now I can say whatever I want about Barack Obama, about well, the serving ones, but you could always say it about previous, but serving you couldn't say things. I can say whatever I want about Donald Trump without any reservation. But I don't have anything really bad to say at the moment. I'll save that for later. Let's see. Also have an interest in Mars. Who? You or me, Christoph? Oh, space and astronomy. I'm all over that. Man, the New Horizons mission to Pluto, I could not wait for it to get there. And you can't imagine, you should have been next to me when I saw the news reports that the probe had died on its way to Pluto just days before it was supposed, or weeks before it was supposed to get there. When they overloaded the operating system and it crashed and it went into safe mode and rebooted and it took them a few days to reestablish contact that was approaching Pluto. I was like, oh no, 13 years wasted. I'm a huge astronomy fan and nut and science fiction. I love this. I can't wait for humans to get to Mars. That's exciting stuff. Big space fan. Really, really into all sorts of things that take place in space and probes. And I am holding out and predicting that there is life on Enceladus. Under the frozen oceans, there is some form of life there. And one day, hopefully, I'll be proven correct. Hopefully, I'll still be alive when that happens. But I think Enceladus, people say Titan is more likely to have it, but I think Enceladus has life. And I think it's a very real possibility that we'll find life on Enceladus one day. We shall see. Also, Enceladus is one of my favorite moons. It's so beautiful. You can see it from all over. It reflects because it's all ice. It's amazing. All right. So now that you mentioned your upbringing, can you please explain to me where the saying "born with a silver spoon in your mouth"? I know what it means. But, I don't know. I don't know where it comes from. I think it comes from English culture. The English aristocracy having silverware, their cutlery was silverware. And so being born with a silver spoon meant that you were born in privilege and you had access to those sort of things, whereas other people didn't even have that kind of cutlery. Before the modern industrialization, people had wooden forks and spoons and things like that, if they had anything at all. But silverware was silver was a precious commodity, and making silverware was saved for the extremely rich and wealthy and privileged. And so I think that's where the phrase came from, but I'm not an expert on that. But I think that's where it came from. But I definitely was not born. Yeah, there you go, Christoph. Probably old wealthy families could afford silverware. Yeah, others couldn't. But today you can order, pressed steel. It looks like silverware, but we call it cutlery. Or you can get actual silverware. But having actual silverware today, it's kind of a pain. You'd rather have stainless steel. Silverware, you always have to clean it. Whereas stainless steel, it's less so. Paulie says, to question in your Army years, if you're okay with it, are you a Green Beret or Special Skills? No, I'm not Special Forces. I've worked a lot with Special Forces in Africa, but not just in Africa, in places I can't talk about. But yeah, I've worked with Special Forces, but I'm not Special Forces. I was in a unique career field. So to give you some perspective, the Army has approximately 575,000 serving active duty members today. All right, now I've been in the Army when it's almost 1,800,000, but 575,000 today as we speak. Of that, there are approximately 1,300 commissioned officers who are foreign area officers. And that includes those who are in training. So you have captains and majors who are going through training at postgraduate institutions or language school and things like that, or working in an embassy for an internship. So about 1,300 officers. Of that, you have a small number who are African specialists. Now, I don't know the current numbers, but normally it's about 36 majors and 38 lieutenant colonels and 18 full colonels. So we're talking less than 100 officers in the U.S. Army of nearly 600,000 people are specialists that do what I do. And as a colonel, which I did for the last several years, there are only 15 to 18 of us at any given time all around the world who are Africa specialists. Now, about a half of those or a third of those are in Africa as attachés or security cooperation officers or liaisons. Some are at the Africa Command in Stuttgart, and some are in the United States, like at the War College, the position I held, or at the Pentagon. So that's a very, very unique field with a very small number of people who are qualified to be in it. Now, today, I can't speak for the folks who are in the field today, but when I came up in that career field, most of the people that were designated for Africa wanted to be foreign area officers, but they didn't want Africa. They wanted Western Europe because a lot of them are imagining this career field. You're an attaché, you go to cocktail parties in Stockholm or in Berlin or in London, and that's what your life is all about. Well, for me, not having been born into wealth or influence, I saw that as a major in Africa, I could be an attaché or security cooperation officer and have outsized influence. And I learned this from a gentleman who retired a long time ago, known as Colonel Ferguson in the U.S. Army. He was an Africa specialist, like I became, and he had been in Chad in the 1980s when the Libyans invaded. Now, he was there as the attaché, and his job was to report about what's happening in Chad, to let our government know about the military developments there, and share information with the Chadian military as appropriate. But what happened is that he found himself riding around in their technicals with their crew served weapons on the back of these jeeps out there in the desert as they were in combat fighting the Libyans. Technically, he was actually involved in the combat. He wasn't supposed to be. I met him in California when I was a younger officer, and he told about his experiences there. And then he was also later based in Tunisia, and I followed him to Tunisia sometime after that. So I learned a lot about things he was doing. I said, wow. And I started thinking about Africa and how, unlike Europe, where usually the attaché is a full colonel or a general in some countries, but in Africa, you could be a major and be an attaché, be the defense attaché or the security cooperation guy, or even a lieutenant colonel and be in charge and responsible for relations with the host nation. And to me, it seemed like Africa was the next frontier and the place where things can happen. There's a television show from a long time ago known as The Adventures of Briscoe County. It was here in the United States about 25, 30 years ago, a kind of a comedy Western show. And he was always talking about he was trying to look to the next big thing. And to me, Africa was always the next big thing. And I think I've been right about Africa. It's just a question of the timing. I've never claimed it's the next big thing now. I've always said it's the next big thing at some point in the future. And I think that's definitely the case with Africa in the next 3 decades. It will be the next big thing, regardless of what happens in the rest of the world. Just because of the population growth that's going to occur, no matter what people try to do to stop it between now and 2050. So, oh, MERS. Oh, yeah. Okay, Chris. Yeah, I said MARS instead of MERS. Yeah, MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. That's correct. I misspoke. But yeah, I am interested in Mars too. MERS and Mars. It is a good joke. Okay, so Paulie, yeah, that's a little bit about that. So I'm not special forces, but I have worked with those guys, and I've worked in a lot of different agencies. So Coolio says, if I'm going to ask you if you've ever had helped your fellow brothers in combat with shell shock or experiencing yourself. When you say shell shock, I think you're talking about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Um, it it's interesting you should ask that because part of retirement is you have to go through a process of a medical examination once you retire. You can do it before you retire, but I was busy, so I did after I retired with the Veterans Administration to determine service-related disabilities, and that's physical and mental. So I had never spoken to a psychologist before in my entire life, and in late, was it March? Yeah, March, when we started the lockdown. Yeah, I think it was March. Yeah, I had to go. The Veterans Administration sent me to an appointment in Baltimore, and I spoke to a shrink for about 2.5 hours. And it sure seemed to me that the tenor of the questions was focused on whether I had post-traumatic stress disorder. And I don't know if that's because they thought I had it or they're just checking all the blocks and going through the bases. But I'm not aware I've had post-traumatic stress disorder, but I've had a very unusual life in my childhood in particular, and I experienced a great deal of trauma that most people never experience before I was an adult. And so I like to think that those who survive trauma, they're stronger, and I think that it helps you cope. this isn't scientific, this is just my own view of things. And so a lot of the horrific things I've seen as an adult and I've seen in combat and I've seen others do to each other on this planet, I experienced similar or worse things as a child. And so I think that's helped me deal with it. So I don't know that I have PTSD or shell shock, if that's a term you want to use it. I have had colleagues who had it. My stepfather served in Vietnam. He certainly had it. He would wake up swinging his fist, thinking he was being attacked, and in the middle of the night. Really crazy stuff. Yeah, so I've certainly seen it. But with colleagues in uniform, not something I've come across often. I have seen people whom I've known whose demeanor and behavior has changed after deployments, and oftentimes you wonder if it's up to that. But people in uniform are very reticent to seek mental health assistance, and so it's a problem that most people try to hide, and so it's difficult to assess it. Usually, if people are able to hide it or deal with it until they retire or get out of uniform, and then it manifests when they don't have that support system around them, or that sense of mission and purpose isn't there on a daily basis. So it's a difficult subject, but it's one that the Veterans Administration pays a lot of attention to. Every time I get an email, which is frequently from the Veterans Administration, every time I go in to see them, one of the first questions I get, or when I go online, I get this little chat window. Are you thinking of suicide? How are you feeling? Are you contemplating? You have any concerns? And they have someone available to talk to veterans 24 hours a day. So a lot of people don't realize that, but that service is available here in the United States. And so good on them that they provide that. But no, I've not really helped people in any capacity in that for that particular issue. But I've certainly known people and been understanding of those who've had it. Um, so were you OPSEC essentially then? No, well, operational security is part of responsibility. That's a joint responsibility between the intelligence officer and the operations officer. Between the two of you have to plan out measures to protect operations, and that's what OPSEC is. Yeah, so I always did OPSEC, particularly as a tactical intelligence officer, and I've always been cognizant of OPSEC as a professional, a military professional. But no, it's not an affectation. That was just a single task, something I did during the course of my career. Let's see what else. Chris, do you know a Andrew Hirsch? No, in Foreign Service. So he's a Foreign Service officer with the State Department. No, I do not know the name, but I've known a lot of Foreign Service officers. Tintin or Tintin. So do you go by Tintin, the French pronunciation, or you call it Tintin? Because in French it's Tintin. Um, just thought I'd mention Renegade Report has openings for more channels. Just wondering if you would be interested, perhaps rugby, history, whatever you want to talk about. Um, yeah, I'm not familiar with Renegade Report. Is that a streaming channel or what it is? Um, yeah, could be something mutually beneficial. Yeah, that sounds interesting. I'd love to do it. I've been looking to have a radio program. Well, if it's a streaming radio program, that's fine. Yeah, that would be something that would be interesting to me. So, yeah, please reach out to me, Tintin or Tintin, and we'll chat more about this. That's something that would definitely be of interest to me. I think I'd like to do that. I was, as I mentioned earlier in the stream, I was thinking or considering getting involved in radio, AM radio here in the States, but I've not really made any effort to go out and check into it. So anyway, but yeah, that would interest me a lot. So I'm putting now on the screen a picture of Evans Larby. So for those who are able to tune into my scheduled live stream yesterday on Saturday, Evans Larby is a small-scale commercial farmer based in Ghana. He's Ghanaian, but his mother's actually Kenyan. His father is Ghanaian, so he grew up in Ghana. And he runs a small farming operation called Be It Farms. Now, for those of you from South Africa, you'll look at Be It and go, that's not right, because it's spelled like bite for Bite Bridge, the crossing with Zimbabwe. But no, it's not Bite, it's Be It. He took the concept of Be It, put BEIT, so Be It Farms. And he owns some farmland, and he has difficulty getting land tenure over others. So we talked yesterday for about an hour and a half on farming in West Africa and in Ghana in particular, the challenges, government support, lack of support, credit available, land tenure issues with traditional land ownership and chiefs holding control over it communally. And also we talked about access to agricultural inputs, education for agriculture, what levels it occurs there, his workforce. He has a workforce of 150 that work for him on his farms. And in this case, we kind of wrapped up towards the end, focused on the Wuhan coronavirus and the impact of that on farming in Ghana. And it is having an impact. So we talked about that. So that stream is available on the channel for those who want to check it out later on. A number of people who tuned in yesterday were from the agricultural sector, some from South Africa. And I understand that several have already been in touch with him to talk about working with him or perhaps supporting his farming efforts in Ghana. So thank you all so much for that if you're doing that. That's wonderful. It's great to see people work together. And for South Africans in particular who are being denied access to government tenders and by extension being denied contracts by larger businesses that are terrified of the ANC and its racially discriminatory BEE policies and forcing subcontractors to be compliant with the things that they need to do to get government tenders. This has pushed a lot of minority-owned businesses in financial jeopardy even before COVID-19 and led to a lot of disillusioned minority business owners in South Africa. My encouragement to you is that you look further afield outside of South Africa where you won't have to deal with racist government policies that deny you an opportunity to profit from your expertise, your energy, your drive, and your capital. And that may be in agriculture or mining or services, something else in another country. It's easier within inside of SADC and especially easier inside of SACU, the Southern African Customs Union, which would include Botswana, Namibia, Lesotho, Swaziland, and South Africa. But it is still possible. Countries like Rwanda, Ghana have open business places, and it is possible to put an investment there. You got to have some local knowledge, but you can get that from a consultant, or you can just go figure it out on your own if you have the time and energy. Anyway, so that's kind of what I do these days is I provide consulting services to folks to help them get into markets in Africa and inform them about it. So all the stuff you guys are listening to for free, these are the things that I charge people for. So, but I'm not really doing much in the way of consulting right now because the Wuhan coronavirus and COVID-19 has also impacted my nascent business efforts in consulting. So let's see what else. Coolio says it's a basic question, but what did you think about your MREs? Okay, so here's the funny thing. Let me tell you, this is a little story, okay? And see how many people stick with me before we leave people. So my first meal ready to eat occurred right after MREs became available. So I was in basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, or as we call it, Fort Lawson Woods. And that was in November, December of 1983. After I'd spent a year at university, I joined the Army. So I came in then. That was my first experience in uniform. And I was there. We came back from the range one day, and it was too late to go to the dining facility because they'd already closed it. So the drill sergeants came in, and they brought these boxes. They had guys carry boxes in, open them up, and then they tossed these MREs at us. My first meal ready to eat was turkey diced with gravy, which had a freeze-dried hash brown potato in there. It had a little chocolate bar, and it had turkey diced with gravy in these packets. And we didn't heat these. So I ate these in the barracks, and I ate it and I was so hungry and it tasted so good. So I fell in love with turkey diced with gravy and I went every effort I could. I tried to find it. There were some truly nasty and unpleasant meals at that time, but that was a very good one. Over the years, the MRE has transformed and other things, including they started putting M&Ms in there at one point, kind of like Smarties for the European crowd. And they made it much more palatable. I haven't eaten MREs much in recent history, but the last time I ate them regularly was probably about 8 or 10 years ago, and they were still pretty good, and they were much better than they were in 1983. But yeah, I like them. But we also had something called tea rations, and those were prepared meals that came in tinfoil things, and you could cook them by putting them in this field cooker that boiled water and it heated it up. And we had this lasagna and this like blueberry cake that came with it. When I went to Saudi Arabia, in advance of the first Gulf War, as we prepared and people deployed there, I was on the advance party. So the only meals we had were tea rations. And every day I ate that blueberry cake and that lasagna, and I was in love with that stuff. I never got tired of it. Ate it for about a month and never got tired of it. So I enjoyed tea rations. Then the old C rations, I actually had those too because there were still some left in the inventory when I came in the Army. Those were not so great, didn't like them. And so we've had other rations, but I did enjoy the meals ready to eat, and people actually pay for them. They like them. Now they don't last forever, contrary. But one thing that's really bad about the the MREs is the amount of plastic waste. Whew, that's a lot of plastic waste. And when it's cold, it's hard to get inside those things. I used to have to take the P38. That's the can opener, little tiny one that you have. They don't give those anymore, but they had them from the C rations. I used to have to take that, use it to tear the plastic because in the cold, the plastic became so difficult to open that you're sitting there ripping your teeth apart trying to tear this thing open. All right, so I do like those. Paulie says, I understand now. I have a huge question for U.S. Army Marines. If I had the chance or USA Green Card, I'd list tomorrow Ranger schools where I would have gone given the choice. Well, Ranger School is a good option, but you'd probably have to enlist for that option because it's difficult to come by. So, for instance, as an intelligence officer, when I came back in active duty in 1989, they were already reducing the number of people who are not infantry that could attend the Ranger School, for instance. So I could have competed to go to Ranger School. And what happened is that they had a specific physical fitness test, which is much more rigorous than the standard fitness test that we all took. And so a number of people in my class decided to do that, and they would show up at 4:30 every morning and train for an extra 45 minutes to an hour of physical training before we had regular PT, so they could be prepared for the test and pass it. And from my class of 75 students in the intelligence course, they only had 3 slots. I wasn't that interested in Ranger School. I was more interested in getting back to Germany, and that was a wise decision because I got back to Germany as an officer and served before the Cold War ended. So I did it as enlisted as an officer. If I had gone to Ranger School, it would have been after because it was right at the end. And also, the timing just worked out because I wound up in a unit that was scheduled for deactivation but hadn't been announced. So we started deactivating, and then we were alerted to go to Saudi Arabia, went to Saudi Arabia and fought in the Gulf War, came back and deactivated. And as a consequence, I wound up staying in Germany longer and had like 4.5 years there instead of just 3 years. So it really all worked out for the best. So no regrets about not going to Ranger School. All it would have done for me is an experience that I would have in common with other Ranger qualified people. I never would have served in a Ranger unit. I would have had a patch on my shoulder. I'm not a badge wearer, so I have lots of badges, but I'm not a badge collector. Right. So let's see what else. A bit controversial for some, but check out some videos about them on YouTube. The French Foreign Legion. Well, the French Foreign Legion has long served a purpose in the foreign policy of the French government. It's been a useful tool for them, and they've employed it into China, across Africa, and other places. Yeah, the French Foreign Legion has got a reputation, but anyway. Yeah, so that's Evans Larby. I've got there on the screen just to remind folks. And let's see what else. Anything else anyone wants to ask a question about? Been on for a long time for a stream. So um, let's see. Paulie says, too far gone now. Oh, too young or too old now. Yeah. So we've talked about Botswana today. We've talked about Pennsylvania with Governor Wolf, Botswana Crafts. Once again, those baskets I showed everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. For those who came late, some of you have been here the whole stream, but I was showing baskets from Botswana Crafts. These are professional artistic works of art made in Botswana, and they're available at Botswana Crafts, which is located in Gaborone, not far from the airport. So Mark says you should watch Steve 1989 reviews rations. Oh, that would be interesting. Yeah, the Boer War. No, I'm not familiar with that channel. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, Renegade Report. Tintin is Renegade Report? Is that a YouTube channel or is that a broadcast channel or something like that? Because I know like Ronaldo Host does a DJ program, but that's on an internet-based radio station. So yeah, I'm not that familiar with where'd it go? Renegade Report. I'm not familiar with it. So maybe that's a platform. I'm not sure. Anyway, so this Friday, once again, let me mention once more here. Let me go through my begging phase now. I'm not a monetized channel. That's not the begging. But the begging is if you're coming on this channel and you're enjoying the content, you're not a subscriber, I ask that you push the subscribe button right down there, subscribe to the channel, and then you'll be able to follow all my content. And also, if you find the content interesting, subscribe, but also be sure to push the bell icon to the side there so that you get notified whenever I do a live stream like I'm doing today. This is the Stray Voltage, random access, random thoughts, open discussion live stream, plus a regularly scheduled live stream, which I'm now doing on Saturdays, normally with a guest. And on the screen, you see my guest from yesterday, Evans Larby, a farmer from Ghana, CEO of the Be It Farms. And then, so subscribe, hit the bell icon. And also I ask, now I'm begging, give me a like down there. I don't have the window open to see if I've got any likes or not, or dislikes, but if you like the content, the conversation, please give me a like. That's important, not from an ego standpoint. Trust me, my ego is big enough. I don't need any inflation there. It's really about driving viewership to the channel so that we can have this discourse and talk about issues that interest people about Africa, about South Africa, and about the United States and other places as well, and issues that matter. So the way it works is the algorithms with YouTube, the more likes you have as a percentage of people who viewed your video, it's more likely to get promoted and appear as an impression on somebody's channel, and they may click on it. I'm getting anywhere between 5 and 10% click-through rates on impressions, which is actually pretty good as I understand it on YouTube. So that must mean that the content that I've been producing is of interest to somebody. That's really good. So I'm kind of happy to see that. Do I have any special licenses? No, I don't for my service days. No, I don't have any special licenses. Well, I was a law enforcement official. I was a badge carrying federal official as a counterintelligence officer. I'm a special agent. And that's a license, but it was a qualification. So I carried a badge and credentials, had the authority to arrest and detain people and investigate people who fell under federal jurisdiction, which is military and employees of the Department of Defense, among others. So yeah, so I did do that. In fact, that reminds me, I need to write to them because if you pay a fee, like $100 some, they will take your badge and your credentials and they will mount them on a plaque because they retire them. And then you can hang it on your wall as a keepsake of your time as a federal agent. So kind of like Fox Mulder for, you know, The Truth Is Out There and the X-Files, I too was a federal agent, but in a different capacity. And I actually did investigations. I did espionage and counterintelligence investigations, none of which I can talk about, but I did do those as a federal law enforcement official. So interesting. So when I hear people talk about the warrants and the whole thing, what they did to Donald Trump, I know the real story about how that works, FISA warrants and FISA courts and what the standard is to meet that. And when I tell you that you should trust me when I say that the FISA court system was abused and illegal, unlawful surveillance was conducted on members of society in the Trump campaign in what must have been a political effort. I can't speak to the objectives or the intent, but it seems clear that it was a political objective to undermine the incoming administration and Donald Trump. This is a true story. And we're now seeing more of that exposed this week as we see that the FBI agents were colluding, they love that word, colluding to intentionally set Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, in a perjury trap by setting up the conversation and the facts as if he was lying when he wasn't, so they could say later that he had been lying. Shameful. And people say, well, if you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to hide. But the reality, ladies and gentlemen, is that even if you have nothing to hide, most of the things we say and do can be used against us in a fashion by people who have malicious intent to distort the argument and mislead people. That's just the reality of life. And having worked in government service and carried a badge of credentials, I can tell you that people can do that. You can make innocuous things look malicious and make it look like somebody who had no intention to do something wrong, if that's your desire. This is why governments must be held to account, and government power should not be unfettered. Governments must be responsible and accountable to citizens. That's just a reality. And that is something that a lot of people lose sight of, particularly when we face a crisis. When we faced the 9/11 crisis, the outcome of that was the Patriot Act, which infringed upon the civil liberties of Americans in ways that most had no idea. Even members of Congress who approved the legislation and sent it to the president for signature didn't realize the depth of what they were authorizing and the intrusion on American civil liberties. Now, that doesn't mean it wasn't necessary. The government made a good argument for it, and that's how it got approved, but it was reviewed and then it's been changed over time because it wound up being more excessive than it needed to be. But now in the Wuhan coronavirus, COVID-19, we have a situation today in which not only are people willingly surrendering their liberties around the planet, but governments are actively taking liberties. So let's talk about South Africa. Please explain to me why it is that Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma is able to stop the legitimate lawful sale of cigarettes under the current level. I don't get that. She doesn't have the authority to do that. She just said it, so it is. No. The Emergency Powers Act doesn't give her that authority if the president has said something different, or maybe I'm misunderstanding. But whatever the case is, what is the reason for the cigarette sales? And I know we're all listening to music now. They roll the saliva on the papers, you know. Anyway, I got that. Yeah, but the point is that this is an infringement upon people's liberties that's wholly unnecessary. Her argument is ridiculous. People who share cigarettes that are pre-rolled, not Zoll, not making your own. No, not that. I'm not talking about that. But pre-packaged cigarettes that people purchase. If you're sharing cigarettes, well, these are the same people that share a glass with someone else. Here, have a sip of my Starbucks. No, I don't share my drink with someone. I don't share my fork with someone. And I wipe the seat before I sit down. Anyway, my point is that this is a weak argument at best. The Zoll question about rolling cigarettes or Daga and making smoke and then sharing it and the saliva's on it. Then don't sell the papers. Don't sell loose tobacco. But what does that have to do with rolled cigarettes that come in a package? Nothing. The people who share cigarettes prepackaged out of the package, here, have a smoke. Those people already have health issues to begin with. And that's a small number of people that do that. So this paternalistic control issue, this totalitarian approach to civil society is going to cause some serious problems, and there'll be blowback for it. The question is what damage will be done to society and civil liberties around the world. People so easily accept government constraints on their lives. In Canada, Justin Trudeau, I don't know the authority for this because I'm not an expert on Canadian law, but Justin Trudeau apparently, or the Parliament or somebody, but Trudeau is being attributed to it, has just banned the sale and transfer of assault weapons. A fictional title to begin with. There's no such thing as an assault weapon. Every weapon is an assault weapon. You don't make guns and shoot at somebody and it's not an assault. It's an assault. Every gun's an assault weapon. But what they're trying to do is ban high capacity magazines and high capacity automatic and semi-automatic weapons. They've just banned them in Canada. You can own them, but you can't use them. Okay, so what is it, a museum piece? Do I have a museum in my house now if I have an AR-15 or I have an AK-47 that's lawfully held by me, which some people in Canada do? Yeah, these constraints on freedoms. And what is the basis for that? Because there have been shootings in Canada. So because you've not controlled criminals' access to firearms, you'll punish everybody. Yeah, that's not a good recipe, ladies and gentlemen, for civil society when government intrudes on people's personal liberties like that. Now, that's really an issue here in the States, and the state of Virginia is trying this now under Governor Northam, who a lot of people are calling Governor Klan Robes because the identification of him in a University Days photograph in which either he is dressed as a Klansman or in blackface, one of the two, but it's him. So people have taken to calling him Governor Klan Robes as if he's a member of the Ku Klux Klan. But he's getting away with all sorts of infringing upon, and in my view, unlawfully passing executive orders and getting legislation through the Virginia legislature that is unconstitutional and will not stand up to legitimate scrutiny if someone brings a case that the Supreme Court is willing to listen to regarding civil liberties and constitutionally guaranteed rights. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed upon. It is a sacred right in this country. I don't myself have arms, but I defend the freedom to have it. And because government fails to properly police the sale, the licensing, and the training of people who have firearms and who are criminals, others shouldn't suffer. All right, so but that's a very controversial topic there. So let's see. Ramon, I see, is part of Renegade Report. Okay, it's very good. Cool piece to have as a reminder of your service. Yeah, the badge credentials would be, yeah, cool. That would be really cool. So I keep forgetting to do it. I have the paperwork, and by the time I get around to it, they'll probably raise the price. It's like $125 or $45, but be money well spent. Have you ever seen those WikiLeaks documents they offer on their website? Some that's really disturbing and lots of intelligence documents, but it's non-classified, so it's kind of public, right? No. All right, so here's a misnomer. Government information is not necessarily something that's available for public use. The fact that something's not classified doesn't mean that it's not protected. So for unclassified information that needs to be protected, for various reasons, there's lots of reasons why you protect it, but you don't classify it. The reason we classify things is not because it's so sensitive, but because the way we obtain the information is sensitive. So you have information obtained through sources that are not that sensitive, need to protect it, but they're important. And then you have vital sources that you can't disclose the way that you got the information, whether it's from a satellite or it's from some other way of measuring information or some personal source, however you got the information, listening communications, however you got the information, it's so sensitive that you protect it. That's why you classify the information. And sometimes information, the aggregate that's unclassified, comes together in an analysis by an intelligence analyst, and the conclusions that are reached are so sensitive that that makes it classified to different levels: confidential, secret, top secret. And then top secret, you have sensitive compartment information, even tighter, narrow window. So you have information that in the Department of Defense we call for official use only. That's protected information that's not available to the public. In the State Department, they call it sensitive but unclassified, SBU. FOUO, SBU. This is not classified information, but it is information that affects the operation and the conduct of official business. And so you protect the information. Now, you protect it because it's not publicly available. You can't just give it to people without approval. It has to go through a screening for approval for release, just like classified information. And you can't simply leave it laying about. Like, for instance, on my table right here, I've got a stack of newspaper reports. If this was for official use only, like a document, a memorandum from my office, I can't just leave it laying on the table. I have to protect it. So when I leave the office, I have to put it in a locked drawer so that it's out of physical sight. But that's not what you do with classified information. Classified information must be locked in a safe, and if it's top secret information, it must be locked in a special facility that has access controls. So anyway, you can't simply share information because the government has it. If the public wants to know about something or thinks it has a right to know about it, we have the Freedom of Information Act here in the States. And you can request unclassified information that is protected, like FOUO or SBU. And you can also request classified information. Now, of course, this presupposes you know something about the information existing. But what happens is that people generally ask for Freedom of Information Act about a specific topic. It's referred to the correct agency. They must review it. They must address it. And there are criminal penalties for not addressing it. Trust me, working in government, a Freedom of Information Act or a FOIA request is one of the most, as a government worker, one of the most annoying and distracting things you'll ever come across, because you have to devote countless hours to looking to see if you have any information so that you're in compliance. And oftentimes, what the public is asking for, most of the information is not particularly good. Now, you do have some watchdog groups like Judicial Watch here in America that are very, very astute when it comes to requesting information, how they request it. So they've used the Freedom of Information Act to get information about the text message from Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, and also for this whole Russia collusion thing over the past few years. And government agencies had to comply. And when it was classified, then it's required to go before a declassification authority to see if it's able to be declassified, because the public has asked for it and the public has a right to know the information if it's being done. But if the sources that provide the information could be compromised and future collection could be compromised, then it won't be declassified until the eventual date when it does happen. So that's kind of how it happens. You can't simply give information away. That's important. And that's part of Operation Security, OPSEC. Okay, let's see. Yeah, the WikiLeaks thing. So the problem with the WikiLeaks, I'm not sure what you're referring specifically to, but I can talk about a very disturbing part of WikiLeaks, and that's the whole thing that took place with what's the name now? The transsexual Bradley Manning. Now, what's Chelsea Manning's name? So Bradley Manning, who's a convicted criminal, pardoned shamefully by President Obama, who has no respect or authority or no respect or regard for this nation's security, and this shameful pardoning of Bradley Chelsea Manning. But Bradley Manning, as a young intelligence analyst, a young soldier, had access on classified networks to information in which Bradley Manning had no need to know about it. So you can't just see classified information because you have a clearance. You have to have a need to know to perform your job. So because of 9/11 and the compartments in intelligence was placed into the silos, so one agency couldn't see this, another one couldn't see that, there was a move inside the intelligence community to share information more broadly. One of the shortcomings of that is that when you share information more broadly, you make information accessible on networks to people who have no need to know about it. And if you have a malicious actor like Bradley Manning, who shamefully went into the US government classified system and looked at cables. These are messages that our embassy sent back to Washington, D.C. to talk about news and events and developments in the country, so that we're aware of what's happening in Tunisia, we're aware of what's happening in Egypt, we're aware of what's happening in South Africa. These reports are sent back as what are called cables. And those cables are normally classified because of the information. Sometimes we're talking to government officials, and it's not spying. There's a reason we have embassies. Everyone knows they're there to reduce tensions and share information. But you don't want to be sharing whom you're talking to all the time, because people draw the wrong conclusions. And maybe sometimes they're a spy. But anyway, but the point is that Bradley Manning had access to cables written, and he stole them by copying them onto some sort of removable media, which is not even supposed to be on these networks, whether it was a thumb drive or a CD or DVD that was burned, copy that information, and then took it off a government classified system that he wasn't even supposed to be reading in the first place. But because of relaxed standards for access, he had access to it. Took that and then sent it to WikiLeaks. And the shameful conduct of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, and their ridiculous attitude that everyone's entitled to know everything about everybody, which is just ludicrous. How can you negotiate as a business person or as a government if the other party knows all your cards and your position? You can't. And so people are entitled to their secrets. Now, when a government has malfeasance and has secrets, that's a different story. But this wasn't malfeasance. These were reports from embassy officials about foreign actors in foreign countries, so that we were informed in Washington knowing what was going on. So it gave it to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks published it. And what happened? The people of Tunisia, who long suspected the government of Ben Ali was corrupt and was diverting contracts to his family members, cousins, nieces, nephews, uncles, and aunts and such, unfairly and illegitimately, now had information classified, stolen, but revealed from a source they trusted, U.S. diplomats at an American embassy. And that touched off the Arab Spring. Now, I know there was more to the Arab Spring than this, but remember the self-immolation of the university graduate that took place in the southern part of Tunisia, which drew the world's attention. This all happened around this time frame, and these cables were released, and Tunisians saw what they long suspected. Now they had confirmation of it, and they were angry. And what was the consequence of that? The consequence of that is the Arab Spring ignited. We saw what happened in Tahrir Square in Egypt took place after this. So, yeah, no respect for Chelsea Manning, a convicted criminal and a treasonous bastard, traitor, to the United States and to the world. Someone held up by the left as an icon, and the person is lucky that they didn't get the death penalty, because that was certainly something that could be applied in this case. What else? It's Roman Cabernac and Jonathan Witt podcast channel. They're looking at broadened content. Okay, well, Roman, maybe he'll have me come on there. We'll see what happens. It was interesting to talk to him. They're mostly talking about informal settlements in those places. Nobody ever smokes a little cigarette. They share almost everything. Yeah, well, but they still share things. So keeping them from Coolio, keeping them from having cigarettes is not going to solve the problem. They're sharing, chibuku if they've got their hands on it. They're sharing a cup of cider. They're sharing a jug of water. They're sharing utensils. You can't stop that. Now, this is because Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma used to be the health minister, and she doesn't like cigarettes. I don't like cigarettes. I find the smell offensive. It gives me a headache. I can smell a cigarette from 100 meters away. Yes, I can. Trust me, I can. People are like, no, you can't. Yes, I can. You can ask someone who goes to a restaurant with me. We sit in a restaurant where nobody's smoking, and then somebody be smoking somewhere, and I'm like, somebody's smoking. No, they're not. Yeah, they are. And then a few minutes later, we finally realize and figure out where the person smoking is. My nose is that sensitive, and I get instant headache from. I hate cigarettes. But it's a choice. And if someone's not infringing on my space, they should be allowed to smoke. And Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma does not like cigarettes. And she is imposing her values and her views on a spurious basis. And it's ridiculous. And so hashtag NDZ must fall. Anyway, all right. Passing the bottle, Lazal. Yeah, Zal. I love it. That's a great. I got to get the electrons for that. It wasn't available. So I want to download that so I can make that my ringtone. That's awesome. Yeah. What's really awful, so many deaths just for information that was leaked. Yeah, absolutely right. Thank you, Coolio. The deaths of hundreds of thousands of people in the Middle East, if not a few million people, from Tunisia all the way through to Iraq, are on the hands, the blood is on the hands of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, Bradley Manning, and Barack Obama. That's right. That blood is on their hands. And almost nobody brings that topic up. The naive encouragement of the Arab Spring by the Department of State executives under the Obama administration, telling people to get in the streets, was foolish. All of that combined, of course, along with the actions of people in those regions, they were responsible for the actions, but all of it were contributing factors to the Arab Spring and the death of hundreds of thousands of human beings. And not to mention the brutal and horrific things that happened to people like the Yazidi Christians in Iraq. The murder, the gang rape, the enslavement of Yazidi girls, the murder of their fathers and brothers and uncles, grandparents, disgraceful. Nearly wiped out the Yazidi as a people that had lived for millennia and survived numerous forms of governance in that region, nearly wiped out by the horrific actions of ISIS, or Daesh, ISIL, ghouls. Yeah, anyway, there you go. So, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. Okay, folks, well, wow, we've been on for 3 hours. I have got to take a break here shortly because I have a broadcast at 6 p.m. tonight. It's about 2 hours away. I haven't eaten today, so I probably need to get something to eat. I didn't exercise, but I'm not going to miss that so much. My back is still a little sore from injuring it. But if you've got any questions for me, if not, I'll wrap up here shortly. And thanks a lot. I've had 10 or more viewers here the whole time we've been on. I can't believe we've gone this long. So when I do these live streams like this, I've often wondered, could I manage to host a 2 or 3 hour radio program? And when I do these streams, I'm of the opinion that, well, I probably can. I think I could probably do that. Right. So the ripple effect is still running through the world today, according to Julio. Absolutely true. That is the case. I think we've lost one person there, so it looks like people realize I'm dropping off. Paulie, the Manning story seriously undermined the core and Marshall Court. Obama essentially dropped. Yeah, he did. But I think there was a bit of naivete on the part of the Obama administration. I think they legitimately thought that they had the right idea, but they were just wrong. While it was not something that was in accord with our core values in the United States when it comes to liberty and democracy and freedom and human rights, nonetheless, the totalitarian states of North Africa and the Middle East kept a lid and controlled civil disorder in their countries for decades. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't mean it should have continued, but it should have changed in a much more deliberate fashion than it actually took place. But the problem when you have a totalitarian state is that the moment you start letting the pressure valve open, you lose control. Gorbachev did not mean to end the Soviet Union. He gets credit for the Soviet Union dissolving, but that was not his goal. His goal was to reform the system from within with glasnost, openness, and perestroika, truthfulness. His goal was to open the system up and reform it, but continue the Soviet Union. Well, look what happened there. Just from 86 to 87 to 91, the Soviet Union disappeared, and Mikhail Gorbachev was no longer the head of the Soviet Union, the Politburo, just like that. And then we have the rise of Boris Yeltsin, then the demise of Boris Yeltsin, and now look what we're stuck with today. Yeah, when you have a totalitarian state releasing the pressure valve, the thing about society, ladies and gentlemen, is that civil order is a fragile thing. People behaving themselves simply because there's laws is a fragile thing. And authorities need to pay attention to this in the midst of the lockdown taking place around the world. Holding people in prisons, in their abodes, for an indefinite period and constraining their freedoms and their ability to earn a living and feed themselves is not a recipe for success. And it's not necessary in my view. We're not seeing much in the way of a difference in the United States and Sweden, who have two very different approaches to this, but have similar levels of infection. If you protect those who are most vulnerable and allow others to resume activities after a reasonable period of time, which we've achieved and gone past now, you can get back to order. Okay, folks, I think that's got to be it. We're 3 hours and 5 minutes, plus we had a little short thing before we got cut off. Thank you all for tuning in. Please don't forget that Friday, it looks like I'm going to have this thing with Giselle on air. So Giselle will come on here, be streaming on here as she debuts her new album, an exciting new artist from South Africa who sings in Afrikaans and in English. It's country music, a little bit of light pop. Hopefully you can tune in on Friday night. That'll be 7 p.m. Should be interesting. If it doesn't happen, if it falls through, I'll make sure I let people know. But right now the plan is, and I'll put some advertising up for it after I get in touch with her manager, but Giselle's world premiere debut of her first album will be this Friday, 7 p.m., 1900 in Johannesburg time, and at 1300 here on the East Coast of the United States. So thanks everybody for tuning in. I really enjoyed it. It's been a fantastic conversation from my perspective, and I hope that you guys enjoy the content and you follow the channel. And I look forward to the next one. This has been a Stray Voltage live stream from Chris here in Indaba, Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening in Africa, and here in the States, enjoy the rest of your Sunday afternoon. I will be going on for an interview on Truckers channel on Facebook here at 6 p.m. Tomorrow, CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, live stream 10 o'clock Eastern U.S., 4 p.m. Johannesburg time, talking about human rights and counterterrorism. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks a lot. I appreciate your time. Have a pleasant day.